She had 7 quilts left, 7 pieces of thread and memory between her and absolute ruin. Clara Whitmore's hands trembled as her wagon rattled toward the ranch gates, dust choking her throat, sweat stinging her eyes in the merciless Kansas heat. She'd buried her parents 3 months ago. The bank had taken everything else 2 weeks later. Now she was gambling her last shred of dignity on a stranger's mercy. And mercy was a word the frontier had forgotten. Stay with me through this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey travels. The wagon wheel hit another rut and Clara grabbed the bench to keep from pitching forward. The horse, barely a horse anymore, more like an arrangement of bones held together by stubbornness, plodded on without complaint. She'd stopped apologizing to the animal weeks ago. They were both too tired for sentiment. The Boon ranch spread out before her like something from a different world. Fences that actually stood straight. A barn with all its boards. Cattle that looked fed. She'd passed 36 properties on her way west, each one more desperate than the last, each owner more hollow-eyed. But this place had survived something the others hadn't. She didn't let herself hope. Hope was expensive. Clara pulled the wagon to a stop near the main house and sat there, buying herself a few more seconds. Her dress was clean, she'd made sure of that, washing it in a creek yesterday and sleeping in her chemise while it dried on a tree branch. But clean couldn't hide the frayed cuffs or the amateur stitching where she'd repaired a tear along the hem. Her mother would have done it better. Her mother had done everything better. She pushed that thought away and climbed down. The heat slammed into her like a physical thing. July in Kansas didn't mess around. The air shimmered over the hard-packed dirt of the ranch yard, and somewhere a chicken complained about existence in general. Clara smoothed her skirt, checked that her bonnet was straight, and tried to remember how to breathe like a person who wasn't about to crawl out of her own skin. The front door opened before she could knock. The man who stepped out wasn't what she'd expected. She'd built up Caleb Boon in her mind as some kind of cattle baron type. Gray-haired, thick around the middle, probably mean. But the man on the porch was maybe 35, lean and tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that took in everything without seeming to judge any of it. "Help you?" His voice matched him, low, careful, nothing wasted. Clara had rehearsed this. She'd practiced her pitch to the horse, to the empty sky, to her own reflection in creek water. But standing here with those eyes on her, the words tangled up somewhere between her brain and her mouth. "I'm Clara Whitmore." It came out steadier than she felt. "I have quilts, 7 of them. They're well made. My mother was particular about her work. I'm selling them for $8 each, but if you take all 7, I can do $45 for the lot." She watched his face for the reaction she'd gotten used to. That flicker of pity mixed with calculation, the mental math of how low they could push her. But Caleb Boon just looked at her for a moment, then passed her to the wagon. "Let's see them." Her hand shook as she untied the canvas covering the wagon bed. She hated that her body betrayed her like this. She wasn't scared, she was just used up. 3 months of barely eating, barely sleeping, barely anything except moving forward because stopping meant admitting she didn't know what the hell she was doing. The quilts were packed in the trunk her father had made, wrapped in old sheets to keep the dust off. She'd sold everything else, the good dishes, her mother's jewelry, the books, the furniture, the goddamn doorknobs from the house before the bank took it. But she couldn't bring herself to just dump these in the wagon bed, like sacks of feed. Clara lifted out the first one and unfolded it across the wagon's side panel. The pattern was a log cabin design, strips of fabric in burgundy and cream spiraling around a red center square. Every stitch was perfect. Her mother used to say that how you did one thing was how you did everything, and she'd meant it. No shortcuts, no good enough. Caleb stepped closer, and Clara resisted the urge to step back. He ran his hand over the stitching, testing the weight of the fabric, checking the binding along the edges. He knew what he was looking at. That was something, at least. She was tired of explaining quality to people who couldn't tell it from trash. "Your mother made these?" "Yes, sir. All of them. I helped with some of the cutting and piecing, but the stitching, that was her." Clara pulled out the second quilt, this one a star pattern in deep blues and whites. She made one every winter for 20 years. These are what didn't sell before. She didn't finish. Before didn't matter anymore. Caleb examined each quilt as she brought them out. A double wedding ring in pinks and greens, a bear paw in browns and tans. A drunkard's path, her mother's most ambitious pattern, in purples that seemed to move in the sunlight. A simple 9-patch in scraps of everything, the kind of quilt that told the story of a household in fabric. And finally, the last one. A flower garden quilt with thousands of tiny hexagons stitched together in a riot of colors. Your mother had patience, Caleb said, touching the hexagons, and skill. She had both. Clara's throat tightened. She said quilting was the only art form that kept you warm. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not pity, thank God, but recognition maybe. Like he understood what it meant to lose the person who'd taught you how the world worked. He straightened up and looked at her directly. You said 45 for all 7. Yes, sir. That's less than my mother charged, but I know times are hard, and I'm hoping the volume purchase might... I'll give you 65. Claire's brain stuttered to a halt. I'm sorry? $65. That's what they're worth. That's what I'm paying. She stared at him. Math had never been her strong suit, but she could calculate the difference between 45 and 65. That was $20. That was 2 months of careful living. That was the difference between scraping by and actually having options. I don't need charity, she said, and immediately wanted to bite her tongue. What was wrong with her? The man was offering money and she was arguing, but Caleb didn't look offended. If anything, there was approval in his eyes. It's not charity, it's the price. Your mother's work is worth $8 a quilt. More probably, but I'm assuming you need cash today, not 3 months from now when I find the perfect buyer willing to pay 10. Clara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, furious at herself. She'd gotten through burying her parents without crying. She'd walked away from the only home she'd ever known without crying. She'd slept in her wagon for 2 weeks straight without crying. But apparently, basic human decency was going to crack her wide open in a stranger's ranch yard. Thank you, she managed. Caleb nodded once and disappeared into the house. Clara stood there, not quite believing this was happening. She'd grown used to people trying to cheat her, to men especially. They saw a young woman alone and figured she was easy pickings. She'd been offered $4 for all 7 quilts in the last town. $4 delivered with a smile that said he was doing her a favor. When Caleb came back, he had a leather pouch that clinked with the weight of coins. He counted out $65 in silver, stacking it carefully on the wagon's tailgate. Clara watched each coin like it might disappear if she looked away. Where you headed? He asked as she recounted the money with shaking fingers. West, maybe. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I haven't decided yet. You have people out there? No? People anywhere? The question should have felt intrusive, but somehow it didn't. No, sir. It's just me now. Caleb was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon where the heat made everything waver. You had lunch yet? Clara's stomach answered before she could, growling loud enough that they both heard it. Her face went hot. I'm fine. That wasn't what I asked. No, she admitted. Not today. My housekeeper made stew. There's plenty. He said it casual, like he was commenting on the weather, but Clara knew what he was really offering. Food was one thing. An invitation into his house was another. This was a test of some kind, or maybe a gift. She wasn't sure which. She should say no. A single woman didn't accept lunch invitations from strange men, even in the middle of the day. Even when she was so hungry, her hands trembled. People talked, especially in small towns where everyone knew everyone's business and made up the details they didn't know. But Clara was so damn tired of doing what she should do. That's kind of you, she said. I'd appreciate it. If he was surprised, he didn't show it. He just gathered up 4 of the quilts. The man was strong. He made them look weightless and headed toward the house. Clara grabbed the other 3 and followed. The inside was cooler, thank God. Windows on opposite walls created a cross breeze that actually moved the air around. The main room was simple but well kept. Wooden floors that had been swept recently, furniture that was practical rather than fancy, a stone fireplace that probably got a lot of use come winter. It felt lived in without being cluttered, comfortable. A woman emerged from what must have been the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was maybe 50, with gray threading through her dark hair, and the kind of face that had seen things but hadn't let them make her mean. Mrs. Chen, this is Clara Whitmore. She'll be joining us for lunch. Mrs. Chen looked Clara over with an assessing eye that reminded her of her mother. Missing nothing, judging everything, but willing to be fair about it. Welcome, Miss Whitmore. Stew will be ready in 10 minutes. You look like you could use some water before then. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. The water came in a tin cup, cold from the well, and Clara had to force herself not to gulp it down like an animal. She drank slowly, deliberately, while Caleb spread the quilts out over the back of his sofa and chairs. In this light, with the afternoon sun coming through the windows, they looked even better. Her mother's colors sang. These are going to sell fast, Caleb said, studying the flower garden quilt. I'll keep 2 for the house. This one and the star pattern. The others I'll take into town. I know 3 women who will fight over them. You don't have to I'm not doing you a favor. I'm making a smart purchase. He glanced at her. You know anything about cattle? The subject change caught her off guard. No, sir. I'm from Missouri. We had chickens and a vegetable garden, but that's about it. What about horses? I can harness one and unhitch one and yell at one when it's being stubborn. That's the extent of my expertise. The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. That's more honest than most people would be. Mrs. Chen called them to the table, and Clara followed Caleb into the kitchen. The room was spotless, the kind of clean that came from daily attention rather than occasional panic. A pot of stew sat in the center of a worn wooden table, steam rising, and the smell of it, beef and onions and something herbal, made Clara's knees weak. They sat. Mrs. Chen ladled out generous portions and set down a plate of cornbread that was still warm. Clara wanted to fall on the food like a starving dog, but she waited until Caleb picked up his spoon before she touched hers. The first bite was heaven. The second was better. By the third, she had to consciously slow down, but it was hard. Real food. Hot food. Food that someone had made with skill and care and enough ingredients to actually taste like something. So what's West? Caleb asked, breaking his cornbread apart. Clara swallowed. I don't know yet. I figured I'd know it when I saw it. That's a hell of a way to plan a life. Yeah, well, she took another bite, buying time. My parents didn't leave much of a plan behind. They didn't expect to die in the same week. Fever? Cholera? Moved through town fast. Took about 30 people before it burned out. Mrs. Chen made a soft sound of sympathy. Caleb just nodded, but there was something in his eyes that said he understood. Loss wasn't theoretical to him either. I'm sorry, he said. Everyone's sorry. Clara heard the bitterness in her voice and tried to rein it in. Sorry doesn't pay the bank, though. Or the doctor bills. Or the funeral costs. No, Caleb agreed. It doesn't. They ate in silence for a while. Clara tried not to think about how good it felt to sit at a real table in a real chair. How good it felt to eat food she hadn't cooked over a sad little fire in a pan that was too small. How good it felt to be inside, with walls around her and a roof over her head. She couldn't let herself get used to this. This wasn't her life. This was a detour, a moment of grace in the middle of a long, hard road. Tomorrow she'd be back in her wagon, back to rationing her supplies and trying to make her money stretch further than money was meant to stretch. You got a destination in mind at all? Mrs. Chen asked, refilling Clara's bowl without asking if she wanted more. Or are you just pointing your horse west and hoping? Somewhere I can work, Clara said. Somewhere that needs a seamstress, maybe, or a cook. I can do basic mending and plain cooking. Nothing fancy, but enough to get by. Can you read and write? Yes, ma'am. My mother taught school before she married my father. Caleb and Mrs. Chen exchanged a look that Clara couldn't quite read. What? She asked. There's not a lot of women out here who can read, Caleb said, especially not read well. That makes you valuable. Clara wanted to laugh. Valuable. She'd never felt less valuable in her life. She was 23 years old with no family, no home, no prospects, and $7 more than she'd had an hour ago. Valuable wasn't the word that came to mind. But she just said, I'll keep that in mind. The meal wound down. Clara helped Mrs. Chen clear the dishes. She wasn't going to sit there like some kind of guest, while another woman cleaned up and found herself standing at the wash basin, elbow deep in soapy water, feeling almost normal for the first time in months. You're good at that, Mrs. Chen observed, watching her work. My mother believed in useful skills. She said a woman who could keep a clean house and put a decent meal on the table would never starve. Smart woman. She was. Clara scrubbed at a stubborn spot on the stew pot. She was smart about a lot of things, just not about dying young. Mrs. Chen didn't tell her that everything happened for a reason, or that her parents were in a better place, or any of the other useless things people said when they didn't know what to say. She just handed Clara a drying cloth and said, "Life's a bastard sometimes." "Yeah," Clara agreed, "it really is." When the dishes were done, Clara knew she needed to leave. The afternoon was getting late, and she needed to find a place to camp for the night. Somewhere with water for the horse. Somewhere reasonably flat. Somewhere that didn't scream, "Come rob and murder me," to anyone passing by. She found Caleb in the main room going over what looked like ranch accounts. He looked up when she came in. "Thank you for lunch," she said, "and for the fair price on the quilts. I appreciate it more than I can say." He set down his pen. "Where are you camping tonight?" "I saw a creek about a mile back. Figured I'd head there." "That's Gibson Creek. It's on my land." "Oh." Clara felt her face heat. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I'll find somewhere else." "I'm not running you off. I'm telling you it's safe. Nobody's going to bother you there." He paused. "But there's a room here if you want it. Nothing fancy, but it's got a bed and a door that locks." Clara's first instinct was to refuse, but she was so tired of sleeping in the wagon, tired of waking up stiff and sore, tired of listening for every sound in the dark, wondering if this was the night someone decided a lone woman was easy prey. "I don't want to impose." "You're not. Room's empty otherwise." He held her gaze. "And before you worry about your reputation, Mrs. Chen lives here. Her quarters are right next to the guest room. Nothing improper about it." It shouldn't have mattered. Clara's reputation was already shot. A single woman traveling alone, no family, no chaperone. The good people of society had already written her off. But somehow, knowing that Caleb cared enough to address it made her throat tight again. "Just for tonight," she said. "Just for tonight," he agreed. Mrs. Chen showed her to the room, small and plain, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. There was a quilt on the bed, not one of her mother's, but still well made, and a pitcher of fresh water on the stand. "Privy's out back," Mrs. Chen said. "Breakfast is at 6, but if you sleep past, I'll leave something wrapped for you." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for everything." The older woman patted her arm. "Get some rest, child. You look like you're running on fumes and stubbornness." "That's pretty much accurate." When she was alone, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel it. The relief, the gratitude, the bone-deep exhaustion that she'd been pushing away for months. The mattress was thin, but it was clean. The room was small, but it was safe. She should wash up, change into her nightdress, do something productive with this unexpected gift of comfort and safety. Instead, she lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd leave. Tomorrow she'd point her wagon west or south or wherever the road took her, and she'd start the whole process over, find a town, try to sell something, try to find work, try to convince someone that she was worth taking a chance on. But tonight she could just breathe. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, the light coming through the window had gone golden. Late afternoon, maybe early evening. She sat up, disoriented, and it took her a moment to remember where she was. Voices drifted in from outside. Clara went to the window and looked out. Caleb was in the yard with two other men, talking about something that involved a lot of pointing at the barn. One of them laughed at something Caleb said, and Clara realized she hadn't heard him laugh yet. His voice when he did was lower than his speaking voice, rough around the edges, like he didn't do it often enough to keep it smooth. She wondered what his story was, how he'd ended up here. What had made him the kind of man who paid fair prices and offered shelter to strangers? Most people in his position would have taken advantage, would have offered her $30 and called it generous, would have let her go hungry rather than risk the scandal of an unchaperoned lunch. But Caleb Boon wasn't most people. She could see that already. Clara turned away from the window. She needed to stop thinking about him. He'd been kind, and she was grateful, but that didn't mean anything beyond basic human decency. Tomorrow she'd be gone, and he'd forget about her within a week. She poured water into the basin and washed her face, her neck, her arms. The water was cool and clean, and it felt like a luxury. Everything here felt like a luxury compared to what she'd been living with. When she'd cleaned up as best she could, Clara ventured out of her room. The house was quiet. She found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, kneading dough for tomorrow's bread. "Sleep well?" the older woman asked. Better than I have in weeks. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sleep so long. You needed it. Mrs. Chen shaped the dough into a round and set it in a bowl to rise. There's coffee on the stove if you want some. Clara poured herself a cup and stood at the window, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The sky was doing that thing it did sometimes, turning colors that didn't seem real, layers of orange and pink and purple that looked painted on. How long have you worked for Mr. Boon? She asked. 3 years, since his wife died. The words hit Clara like a punch. I didn't know he was married. Was. Sarah passed in childbirth. The baby didn't make it either. Mrs. Chen's hands moved mechanically through the familiar motions of kitchen work, but her voice was gentle. Near broke him. He threw himself into this ranch like a man trying to outrun grief. Did it work? Does it ever? No. Clara knew the answer to that. Grief wasn't something you could outrun. It was something you carried, and if you were lucky, the weight of it got a little easier over time. But it never fully left. He's a good man, Mrs. Chen said. Fair, honest, pays on time, doesn't drink himself stupid or get mean when things go wrong. Out here, that's saying something. I can tell, Clara said. The way he is with the ranch, with you, with... She paused. With me. He didn't have to be kind. No, but that's who he is. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, two women who understood that sometimes words weren't necessary. Dinner was roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots from the garden. Caleb ate like a man who'd been working hard all day, focused and efficient. Clara tried to match his pace so she didn't look like she was desperately hungry, even though she was. I've been thinking, Caleb said, halfway through the meal, about what you said earlier about heading west. Clara looked up. Yes? There's not much west of here except harder ground and longer distances between towns. If you're looking for work, you might have better luck heading south. There's towns down that way that are growing. They need people who can read and write and do skilled work. It was practical advice, delivered without judgment. Clara appreciated that. I'll consider it. Or, Caleb said, and then stopped. Clara waited. Or you could stay here for a while, not permanently. I'm not suggesting anything improper. But the ranch needs help. Mrs. Chen could use an extra pair of hands, and I've got mending that's been piling up for months. I could pay you a wage, give you time to figure out your next move without having to do it from a wagon. Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. Mr. Boon, call me Caleb, and before you decide, think about it. You don't have to answer tonight. People will talk. People always talk. Doesn't mean we have to listen. Mrs. Chen made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been amusement. Clara looked at her, looking for guidance, but the older woman's face was carefully neutral. I don't want charity, Clara said, hearing the echo of her earlier words. It's not charity, it's employment. Fair wages for fair work. Caleb met her eyes steadily. I wouldn't offer if I didn't need the help. It was the same thing he'd said about the quilts. And just like with the quilts, Clara found herself believing him. But believing him and accepting the offer were two different things. This was a bigger decision than selling fabric. This was choosing to stay instead of run, choosing to trust instead of protect herself. Can I sleep on it? She asked. Of course. The rest of the meal passed quietly. When the dishes were done, Clara insisted on helping again. She retreated to her room and sat on the bed, trying to think. The smart thing would be to leave tomorrow as planned. Take her $65 and head toward one of those southern towns Caleb mentioned. Find a boarding house, find work, build a life that didn't depend on the kindness of near strangers. But smart hadn't gotten her very far lately. Smart would have been her parents not dying. Smart would have been having some kind of inheritance that didn't evaporate the moment the bank and the doctor sent their bills. Smart would have been a lot of things that hadn't happened. Maybe it was time to try something else. Clara lay back and stared at the ceiling again, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Footsteps in the hallway. Mrs. Chen heading to her room. A door closing. The creak of floorboards as Caleb moved around in whatever room was his. This could be her life. Not forever, but for a while. A roof. Regular meals, honest work, the chance to catch her breath and figure out who she was now that she wasn't just someone's daughter. Or she could leave, and this would just be a story she told herself sometimes. The night she slept in a real bed and ate real food and met a man who'd been kind for no reason, except that it was the right thing to do. Through the window, the stars were coming out. Clara had gotten used to watching them from her wagon, lying on her back and trying to find patterns in all that chaos. Out here, away from town lights, there were so many of them it was almost overwhelming. Her mother used to say that stars were proof that even in the darkest times, there was light if you knew where to look. Clara had been looking for a long time. Maybe it was okay to stop for a while. She fell asleep still dressed, still trying to decide, and dreamed of quilts spreading across an endless sky. Morning came too early and too bright. Clara woke to the sound of a rooster losing its mind somewhere outside, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. The ranch, the quilts, Caleb's offer hanging in the air like smoke. She sat up and rubbed her face. Her dress was wrinkled from sleeping in it, and her hair had escaped its braid in about 15 different directions. She looked like hell, probably. But at least she'd slept. The house was already moving. She could hear Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, the clatter of pans and the low murmur of voices. Clara splashed water on her face, tried to do something about her hair, and gave up after the third attempt. Some days you just had to accept that you looked like you'd been dragged behind a wagon. When she emerged, Caleb was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, reading what looked like a week-old newspaper. He glanced up when she came in. "Morning." "Morning." Clara felt suddenly awkward, like she'd walked into the middle of someone else's life, which, technically, she had. Mrs. Chen slid a plate in front of her, eggs, bacon, toast, real butter. Clara's stomach made an embarrassing sound. "Eat," Mrs. Chen said. "Then we'll talk." They ate in silence. Caleb finished first and pushed his plate away, still reading the paper. Clara tried not to watch him, but it was hard not to. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away, weathered from sun and wind, lines around his eyes from squinting at horizons. But his hands were steady on the coffee cup, and there was something calm about the way he occupied space. Like he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Finally, he folded the paper and looked at her. "You decide?" Clara swallowed her last bite of toast. "I have questions first." "Fair enough." "What kind of work exactly?" "Mending, like I said. Cooking when Mrs. Chen needs help. Maybe some cleaning. Basic household things." He paused. "I've also got books that need organizing. Ranch records going back 10 years that are a mess. If you can read and write as well as you say, that'd be useful." "What's the pay?" $12 a month, plus room and board." Clara did the math. It wasn't a fortune, but it was steady. And with no expenses for food or shelter, she could actually save something. Build a cushion between her and disaster. "How long?" "As long as it works for both of us. A month, 2 months, 6 months?" "Your choice." "And if people talk?" Caleb's mouth tightened just slightly. "Let them talk. Anyone who knows me knows I run a respectable household. Anyone who doesn't know me can go to hell." Mrs. Chen made a small approving sound. Clara looked down at her plate. This was insane. She didn't know these people. She didn't know this place. Everything in her life so far had taught her that trusting strangers was a good way to get hurt. But everything in her life so far had also fallen apart, so maybe her instincts weren't as reliable as she thought. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay. For a month at least. See how it goes." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Good. We'll start you today. Mrs. Chen can show you around, let you know what needs doing." He stood, picked up his hat from the counter, and headed for the door. Then he paused. "Clara?" "Yes?" "Thank you." The door closed behind him before she could ask what he was thanking her for. Mrs. Chen was already clearing the table. "Well," she said, "let's get you properly settled then." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Chen showed her where everything was: the pantry, the root cellar, the linen closet, the outdoor kitchen they used in summer to keep the house cool. She explained the rhythms of the household: breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Caleb worked from sunup to sundown most days, sometimes later. He had 3 ranch hands who came and went, 2 brothers named Tom and Jake, and an older man called Frank, who'd been working cattle since before Clara was born. "They're good men," Mrs. Chen said, "but they're men. They'll test you, see what you're made of. Don't take any nonsense, but don't go looking for fights either. I'll try to walk that line. You'll figure it out." The mending pile was exactly as bad as Caleb had suggested. Clara found it in a basket in the corner of what Mrs. Chen called the workroom, a small space off the kitchen with good light and a sturdy table. Shirts with torn seams, pants with holes in the knees, socks that needed darning. At least 2 months of neglect, maybe 3. Clara rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Her mother had taught her to sew before she could write her name. Small stitches, even tension, thread that matched the fabric. It was meditative work, the kind that let your mind wander while your hands stayed busy. She'd missed this. The last few months had been all survival, no craft, no time to make anything beautiful or even just functional. By mid-morning, she'd finished 3 shirts and started on a 4th. Mrs. Chen brought her tea without being asked, and Clara realized this was the first time in months she'd felt something close to peace. The door banged open, and one of the ranch hands walked in. One of the brothers, she thought, though she wasn't sure which. He was young, maybe 20, with sun-bleached hair and a cocky grin that probably worked on most women. "Well, hello," he said, looking her over in a way that made Clara's jaw tighten. "You must be the new help." "Clara Whitmore." She didn't stand, didn't stop working. "And you are?" "Jake Morrison. Me and my brother Tom work the cattle." He leaned against the doorframe, still grinning. "You're prettier than the last girl Caleb hired." Clara kept her eyes on her stitching. "Was there a question in there? Or are you just making observations?" Mrs. Chen snorted from the kitchen. Jake's grin faltered. "Just being friendly." "That's nice. I'm working." "Right, sure." He shifted his weight. "Caleb around?" "Out by the barn last I saw." He left, and Clara let out a slow breath. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. "That was well handled." "I've dealt with worse." "I bet you have." The rest of the morning passed quietly. Clara worked through the mending pile, making decent progress. Her fingers remembered the rhythms, even if they were sore from lack of practice. Around noon, Mrs. Chen called her to help with lunch. They made sandwiches, thick slices of bread, cold beef, cheese, pickles. Simple food, but there was plenty of it. When Caleb and the ranch hands came in, they descended on the meal like locusts. Clara hung back, watching the dynamics. Tom was older than Jake, quieter, with the same sun-bleached hair but without the cocky edge. Frank barely spoke at all, just nodded his thanks and ate with the single-minded focus of a man who took food seriously. "How's the mending going?" Caleb asked her. "I've made a dent. Another few days and I'll have it caught up." "Good. After lunch, I want to show you the office. The books I mentioned." Clara nodded, suddenly nervous. Mending was one thing. She knew she could do that. But organizing records? What if she screwed it up? Caleb must have seen something on her face because he added, "It's not complicated. Just needs someone with patience and decent handwriting." "All right." After the men headed back out, Clara helped Mrs. Chen clean up. Then Caleb appeared in the doorway and gestured for her to follow. The office was a small room off the main living area, with a desk, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with ledgers and loose papers. It looked like a strong wind had blown through and scattered everything. "Sarah used to handle this," Caleb said quietly. "After she died, I just didn't. And now it's gotten away from me." Clara looked at the chaos and felt a weird surge of recognition. This was grief in physical form, the inability to touch something that reminded you of what you'd lost. "I can fix this," she said. "You sure?" "Yeah, it'll take time, but I can do it." Something in his posture relaxed. "I'll leave you to it then. If you need anything, just ask." He left, and Clara stood there for a moment, taking in the scope of the job. Then she pulled out the nearest ledger and opened it. The handwriting was elegant, precise. Sarah's, probably. The entries documented everything: cattle purchases, feed costs, wages paid, equipment repairs. But they stopped abruptly in March of last year. After that, Caleb's handwriting took over, messier and less consistent, entries that petered out after a few months. Clara understood. She'd done the same thing after her parents died. The world kept demanding things from you. Bills, decisions, tasks. But your brain couldn't quite process any of it. So things slipped, and slipped, and slipped some more until you were drowning in neglect. She started sorting. Paid invoices in one pile, unpaid in another. Records that were complete versus records that needed information added. It was tedious work, but Clara found she didn't mind. There was something satisfying about bringing order to chaos. Hours passed. The light through the window changed from harsh afternoon to softer late day. Clara's back ached from sitting, but she kept going. She was making progress. Actual, visible progress. That felt good. You planning to work through dinner? She looked up. Caleb was leaning in the doorway, hat in his hands. What time is it? Almost 6. Clara blinked. She'd lost track completely. Sorry, I got caught up. Don't apologize. I'm impressed. He stepped into the room, looking at the organized piles. You've done more in one afternoon than I managed in 6 months. It's not done yet. But it started. That's something. They walked to the kitchen together. Dinner was pot roast with vegetables, and Clara ate 2 helpings without really meaning to. The conversation flowed around her, Mrs. Chen complaining about a fence that needed fixing, Caleb mentioning a cattle buyer coming through next week. Normal household talk. The kind of thing Clara had grown up with but hadn't experienced in months. It felt dangerous, this normalcy. Like if she let herself get used to it, losing it would break something in her that hadn't broken yet. After dinner, she retreated to her room. She needed space, needed to think, but the walls felt too close, so she ended up on the porch, sitting on the steps and watching the stars come out. The door opened behind her. Caleb. Mind company? He asked. It's your porch. He sat down beside her, not too close, but not distant either. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, a distant coyote, the wind moving through grass. You did good today, Caleb said finally. I just sorted some papers. You did more than that. You made a mess into something manageable. That's a skill. Clara picked at a splinter on the step. My mother was good at that, making sense of things. I guess I learned from her. Sounds like she was a good teacher. She was. Clara's throat tightened. She was good at a lot of things. Being a mother, being a wife, running a household. She made it look easy, but I know it wasn't. Nothing's as easy as good people make it look. Caleb made a sound of agreement. Sarah was like that. She could manage 10 things at once and make you think she was barely trying. After she died, I realized how much she'd been holding together. The house, the books, half the ranch decisions I thought I was making alone. You miss her. Every day. He said it simple, factual. But missing her doesn't bring her back. So you figure out how to keep going. Yeah. Clara looked up at the stars. You do. They sat there a while longer, 2 people who understood that some losses didn't heal. They just became part of who you were. Eventually, Caleb stood. I'll let you get some rest. Tomorrow's another day. Caleb? He paused. Thank you for this. For taking a chance on me. You're earning your keep. Nothing to thank me for. But there was. Clara knew there was. She just didn't have words for it yet. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Clara woke early, helped with breakfast, worked on the mending or the books or whatever Mrs. Chen needed. Meals with the household, evening conversations on the porch. It was strange how quickly it started to feel normal. Jake kept trying to flirt, but he backed off when Clara made it clear she wasn't interested. Tom was easier. He treated her like a person, not a puzzle to solve. Frank mostly ignored her, which Clara appreciated. By the end of the first week, she'd finished the mending and made serious progress on the books. She'd also learned that Mrs. Chen had a wicked sense of humor, Caleb was a terrible poker player, and the chickens had strong opinions about everything. On Sunday, Mrs. Chen announced she was going into town. I need to pick up supplies, she said. You want to come along? See what passes for civilization around here? Clara hesitated. She hadn't been to town since she'd arrived. Part of her wanted to stay hidden on the ranch, safe from judgment and gossip. But another part knew she couldn't hide forever. Sure, she said. Why not? The town was called Prescott, and it was about what Clara expected. One main street, a general store, a church, a saloon, a handful of other buildings that looked like they'd been thrown up in a hurry and left to weather. People moved along the boardwalks, going about their business with the grim determination of folks who'd chosen a hard life and were committed to seeing it through. Mrs. Chen pulled the wagon up in front of the general store. I'll be about an hour. You can walk around if you want, or wait here. Clara climbed down. I'll walk. She wandered the street, taking in the details. A dress shop with fabric in the window, not great fabric, but decent enough. A boarding house that looked clean. A building with a sign that read Miller's Restaurant and Bakery. The smell of fresh bread drifted out, and Clara's stomach growled even though she'd eaten breakfast. "Excuse me." Clara turned. A woman about her age stood there, well-dressed in a blue day dress with perfect hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes?" "You're new in town. I'm Rebecca Thornton. My father owns the bank." Of course he did. Clara could spot money a mile away now. It showed in the quality of the fabric, the fit of the dress, the confidence that came from never worrying about the next meal. "Clara Whitmore." "Are you visiting someone?" It was a polite question with teeth underneath. "What are you doing here? Where did you come from? What's your story?" "I'm working at the Boon Ranch," Clara said. Rebecca's smile tightened. "Oh, how industrious of you." There it was, the judgment. Clara had been expecting it, but it still stung. "It's honest work," she said evenly. "Of course. I didn't mean to imply otherwise." Rebecca tilted her head. "It's just that Caleb Boon is a widower, and you're a young woman, and people do talk. Let them. I'm just saying you should be careful. A woman's reputation is fragile out here." Clara wanted to laugh. Her reputation had been dust for months, but she kept her face neutral. "I appreciate your concern. I'm having a tea next Thursday. Several ladies from town. You should come. It would be good for you to meet people properly." It was the kind of invitation that wasn't really an invitation. It was a test. Show up and be inspected. Prove you were worth knowing. "That's kind of you," Clara said, "but I'll have to check with Mrs. Chen about the schedule." "Of course. Well, I hope to see you." Rebecca gave her another smile and glided away, her skirts swishing. Clara stood there, feeling suddenly tired. This was what she'd have to deal with if she stayed. The Rebeccas of the world, with their polite cruelty and their need to put everyone in boxes, the whispers and the judgment, and the assumption that a woman alone must be desperate or damaged, or both. She was both, actually, but that didn't mean she had to perform it for anyone's entertainment. "Don't let her get to you." Clara turned. An older woman sat on a bench nearby, a basket of yarn beside her. She had gray hair pulled into a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Excuse me?" "Rebecca Thornton. She's been queen bee of this town since she was 16, thinks everyone else is just scenery in her life." Clara almost smiled. "You know her well?" "Well enough. I'm Martha Graves. I run the boarding house." She gestured to the building across the street. "Been here 20 years? Seen girls like you come through before." "Girls like me? The ones running from something, or towards something, hard to tell which sometimes." Martha stood, picking up her basket. "Either way, Boon Ranch is a good place. Caleb's fair. Mrs. Chen don't tolerate nonsense. You could do worse." "That's what I'm figuring out." "Good. You seem smart. Smart girls survive." Martha started to walk away, then paused. "And if you ever need a place to talk, my door's open. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone who's not part of your household." "Thank you." Martha nodded and left. Clara stood there, feeling slightly less alone than she had 5 minutes ago. She found Mrs. Chen loading supplies into the wagon. "Ready?" "Yeah." They rode back in comfortable silence. Clara watched the landscape roll by. Grass and sky and not much else. It should have felt empty, but instead it felt clean, like there was room to breathe. "You met Rebecca Thornton," Mrs. Chen said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "You have that look, like you've been politely insulted and can't quite figure out how to respond." Clara laughed despite herself. "She invited me to tea." "Did she now? Should I go?" Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment. "That's up to you. But know what you're walking into. Those women aren't looking for friends. They're looking for gossip and someone to feel superior to." "So you're saying no?" "I'm saying make your own choice. But don't expect kindness from people who've never needed it themselves." Back at the ranch, Clara helped unload the wagon and then returned to the office. She'd been working through the ledgers chronologically, and she'd finally reached the entries from right before Sarah died. The handwriting was still perfect, but there were little things. A smudged word here, a number that had been corrected there, small cracks in the perfection. Clara wondered if Sarah had known, if she'd felt different that day, or if death had just showed up unannounced and taken her without warning. "You're thinking too hard." She looked up. Caleb stood in the doorway, dusty from a day's work. Just trying to make sense of these entries. He came closer, looking over her shoulder. What's confusing? Nothing, really. She stopped. Did Sarah know she was sick before the baby came? Caleb was quiet for so long, Clara thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, No. Everything seemed fine, right up until it wasn't. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. It's all right. He pulled up the other chair and sat. Sometimes I think that was better. She didn't have time to be afraid. She was just here. And then she wasn't. My father went first, Clara said. Cholera took him in 3 days. My mother lasted 5. I watched her die knowing it was coming, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do to stop it. Which is worse, you think? Both, neither. I don't know. Clara set down her pen. Death doesn't care how we feel about it. No, Caleb agreed. It doesn't. They sat there in the dimming light, surrounded by records of a life that had ended too soon. Clara thought about all the things Sarah had written in these ledgers. All the careful planning, the attention to detail, the effort to keep things running smoothly. And none of it had mattered in the end. Death came anyway. She would have liked you, Caleb said suddenly. Clara looked at him, surprised. You don't know that. I do. She had a soft spot for people who didn't quit. You've been knocked down hard, but you're still standing. She would have respected that. Something warm unfurled in Clara's chest. Thank you. He stood. Dinner's probably ready. Mrs. Chen gets cranky if we're late. Over the next week, Clara settled in deeper. She finished organizing the ledgers and started updating the current records. She helped Mrs. Chen with the garden, pulling weeds and harvesting vegetables. She learned which chickens were mean and which were just dramatic. Small things, daily things, the kind of things that built a life. On Thursday, she didn't go to Rebecca Thornton's tea. She stayed at the ranch and helped Mrs. Chen make preserves instead, standing in the hot kitchen with sweat running down her back, stirring pots of berries until her arm ached. You made the right choice, Mrs. Chen said, wiping her forehead. Those women would have eaten you alive. I figured. Besides, this is more useful. We'll have jam all winter now, Clara smiled. Practical. Practical keeps you alive. Fancy tea parties don't. That evening, Clara was on the porch again when a rider came up the road. Not one of the ranch hands, someone else. He dismounted and tied his horse, then walked toward the house with the casual confidence of someone who belonged. Caleb came out before the man reached the porch. David, wasn't expecting you. I was in the area. The man, David, grinned. Thought I'd stop by, see if you died of boredom yet. Still breathing, David's eyes landed on Clara. And who's this? Clara Whitmore. She's helping out around the place. Caleb's tone was even, but there was something protective in the way he positioned himself. Clara, this is David Chen, Mrs. Chen's son. Pleasure, David said, tipping his hat. He had his mother's dark eyes and easy smile. Ma didn't mention she had help now. Recent development, Mrs. Chen called from inside. Get in here and say hello proper instead of lurking on the porch. David laughed and headed inside. Caleb stayed where he was for a moment, looking at Clara. He's harmless, he said. Just loud. I'll survive. Dinner that night was livelier than usual. David had stories about the town where he worked as a blacksmith, about the ridiculous things people asked him to make, about a horse that had kicked down half his shop last month. He was funny and charming, and Clara could see why Mrs. Chen's face lit up when she looked at him. But she could also see the way Caleb relaxed around him, the way years of friendship had built something solid between them. She felt like an outsider again, watching a dynamic she wasn't part of. After dinner, David pulled out a deck of cards. Poker? You're going to lose your money again, Caleb said. Maybe. Maybe not. I've been practicing. They played for matchsticks instead of cash, and Clara watched for a few hands before David insisted she join. Come on. I need someone on my side. I'm not on anyone's side. Even better, neutral party. She sat down. Her father had taught her to play poker when she was 12, said it was a useful skill for reading people. She'd forgotten how much she enjoyed it, the strategy, the bluffing, the way you could learn someone's tells if you paid attention. Within an hour, Clara had won most of the matchsticks. Where'd you learn to play like that? David demanded. My father. He said cards taught you two things, how to lose gracefully and how to spot a liar. Caleb laughed. Actually laughed. It was a good sound, rough and genuine. I like her, David said to Caleb. You should keep this one. The words hung in the air for a beat too long. Clara felt her face heat. Caleb's expression went carefully neutral. She's not a stray dog, Mrs. Chen said sharply. I didn't mean... David looked genuinely apologetic. Sorry, that came out wrong. It's fine, Clara said, even though it wasn't quite. She stood. I should get some rest. Early start tomorrow. She retreated to her room and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. She'd been here almost 2 weeks now. 2 weeks of stability and decent food and work that made sense. 2 weeks of forgetting, just a little bit, that this wasn't permanent. But it wasn't. She was still just the help, still just passing through. And when she left, not if, it would hurt. Maybe it was time to start thinking about moving on, before she got too comfortable, before leaving became harder than staying. A knock on her door. Come in. Mrs. Chen stepped inside. David's an idiot sometimes. Don't take it personally. I'm not. Yes, you are. I can see it on your face. She sat down on the edge of the bed. You're wondering if you made a mistake staying here. Clara didn't deny it. Let me tell you something, Mrs. Chen said. You've worked harder in 2 weeks than most people work in 2 months. You've earned your place here. This isn't charity, and you're not a burden. You're part of this household now, whether you believe it or not. For how long, though? As long as you want. Caleb meant what he said. You can stay as long as it works. Clara looked at her hands. I don't want to get comfortable and then have to leave. That's worse than never getting comfortable at all. Is it? Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle. Or is that just fear talking? Maybe it was. Clara didn't know anymore. Mrs. Chen stood and patted her shoulder. Sleep on it. Things usually look different in the morning. But when morning came, Clara still felt unsettled. She went through her routine, breakfast, mending, working in the garden, but her mind was elsewhere, planning exit strategies, calculating how much money she'd saved, trying to figure out where she'd go next. She was so distracted she didn't hear Caleb come up behind her in the garden. You're pulling up the carrots, he said. Clara looked down. Damn it, she was. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I noticed. He crouched down beside her, helping replant what she'd accidentally uprooted. You want to tell me what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Clara? She sat back on her heels. I'm just thinking maybe I should start making plans, figure out my next move. Something shifted in his expression. You want to leave? I don't know, maybe. I don't want to overstay my welcome. You haven't. But I will eventually. Everything ends, right? Might as well end it on my terms. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What if it doesn't have to end? Claire's heart kicked against her ribs. What? What if you stayed? Not as temporary help, as something permanent. Caleb, hear me out. He stood, and she stood with him. This ranch needs someone like you. Someone organized, someone capable, someone who gives a damn about doing things right. And I think maybe you need this place too. You don't know what I need, don't I? His eyes held hers. You need stability. You need a place where you're valued for what you can do, not pitied for what you've lost. You need to stop running long enough to catch your breath. He wasn't wrong. Clara hated that he wasn't wrong. People will talk, she said weakly. Let them. I told you before, anyone who matters knows I run a respectable household. And the people who don't matter, to hell with them. Clara wanted to say yes. Wanted it so badly it scared her, but wanting things had gotten her hurt before. I need time, she said, to think about it. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. He walked away, leaving Clara standing in the garden with dirt on her hands and her heart beating too fast. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what the hell she was doing. Every logical part of her brain said stay, but the part that had been hurt and left behind and abandoned said run before it happens again. She was still awake when dawn broke, no closer to an answer than she'd been hours ago. Clara dragged herself through the morning routine like someone wading through mud. Her eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep. and her hands shook as she helped Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast. She burned the bacon, actually burned it, something she hadn't done since she was 10 years old. Mrs. Chen took one look at her face and pointed to the door. Go, walk, clear your head. I'll handle this. I can't just... You can and you will. You're no good to anyone like this. Clara didn't argue. She grabbed a shawl and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sun was just starting to climb, painting everything in shades of pink and gold that hurt to look at. Beautiful things always hurt when you were too tired to appreciate them properly. She walked without direction, just movement for the sake of movement. Her feet took her past the barn, past the chicken coop where the rooster was still making his opinions known, past the edge of the cultivated land into the open grassland beyond. The Kansas prairie stretched out in every direction, endless and indifferent. It didn't care about her confusion or her fear or her inability to make a simple decision. It just existed, grass and sky and wind, and there was something almost comforting in that indifference. She sat down in the grass and let herself think. What did she actually want? Not what she should want, not what was smart or practical or safe. What did Clara Whitmore, 23 years old and alone in the world, actually want? The answer came easier than she expected. She wanted this. The ranch, the work, the feeling of being useful instead of desperate. She wanted Mrs. Chen's blunt kindness and the satisfaction of organizing chaos into order. She wanted dinners at a real table and a bed that didn't move when the wind blew. And she wanted, this part was harder to admit even to herself, she wanted Caleb. Not in some fairy tale way where he rescued her and made everything perfect, but in the real way, the complicated way, the way where two damaged people tried to figure out if they could build something together without breaking each other in the process. But wanting something didn't make it safe. Wanting something just gave the world another weapon to use against you. Thought I might find you out here. Clara didn't turn around. She'd recognize Caleb's voice anywhere now. I needed to think. He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, but not touching. They watched the sun climb together, neither speaking. Finally, Clara said, Tell me why you really want me to stay. I told you. No, not the practical reasons. The real reason. Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, This house has been quiet for too long. Not the good kind of quiet, the kind that feels like dying by inches. Clara waited. When Sarah was alive, there was life here, noise and mess and plans for the future. After she died, it was just me and Mrs. Chen rattling around in too much space, pretending we were fine. He picked up a piece of grass and tore it into strips. Then you showed up, and it was like someone opened a window, let some air in. That's not a good enough reason to make me a permanent fixture. Maybe not, but there's more. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something in his eyes she hadn't let herself see before. You make me remember what it feels like to care about something other than work, to want to come inside at the end of the day, instead of finding excuses to stay in the barn. Clara's throat went tight. Caleb, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just asking you to stay. Let things develop however they're going to develop. No pressure, no expectations. Just stay. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in months, maybe years, and it terrified her. What if I ruin it? The words came out barely above a whisper. What if I stay, and it's good for a while, and then I do something or say something or just fundamentally fail to be what you need, and then I'm right back where I started, except worse, because I let myself believe it could work? What if you don't? That's not how my life has worked so far. Maybe it's time your life worked differently. He stood and offered his hand. Come on. Mrs. Chen's probably wondering if we both ran off. Clara took his hand and let him pull her up. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. For a moment they stood there, hands still clasped, and Clara felt the weight of the decision settling into her bones. She could run, pack her wagon tonight, be gone by morning. It would hurt, but she was used to hurt. She knew how to survive it, or she could stay. Take the risk. Let herself want something and hope like hell it didn't destroy her when it ended. All right, she said. All right? I'll stay, really stay, not just for a month or until I find something better. I'll stay, and we'll see what happens. Something fierce and bright flashed across Caleb's face. Yeah? Yeah. Clara pulled her hand free before she could chicken out. But I have conditions. Of course you do. I want a real wage. Not just room and board. I need to know I can leave if I have to, which means I need my own money. Fair. And if people in town give me grief about living here, I'm going to tell them to mind their own business. I'm not going to apologize for my life to make them comfortable. Good. And if this, she gestured between them, if whatever this is turns into something and then turns into nothing, we stay professional. I don't want to lose my job just because things got complicated. Caleb's mouth quirked. You planning on things getting complicated? I'm planning for every possibility. That's how you survive. All right. Anything else? Clara thought about it. Not right now, but I reserve the right to add more conditions as they occur to me. I'll prepare myself. He started walking back toward the house, and Clara fell into step beside him. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Ask me again in 6 months. Deal. They walked in comfortable silence until the house came into view. Mrs. Chen was on the porch, hands on her hips, watching them approach with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. You two done having your dramatic moment in the prairie? She called. For now, Caleb said. Good. Get in here. Breakfast is cold and I'm too old to cook it twice. The meal was quiet, but it felt different somehow, like something had shifted, settled into a new configuration. Clara caught Mrs. Chen watching her a few times with what might have been approval or might have been concern. Hard to tell with Mrs. Chen. After breakfast, Caleb headed out to work with the cattle. Clara returned to the office and the ledgers, but her mind wasn't on numbers. She'd just committed to staying at a place she'd known for 2 weeks with people who were essentially strangers. It was possibly the stupidest thing she'd ever done, or the smartest. Time would tell. She was deep in calculations when she heard a wagon pull up outside. Voices. Multiple. All female. Clara's stomach sank. She had a bad feeling about this. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, looking annoyed. You've got visitors, Rebecca Thornton and her posse. Tell them I'm busy. I tried. They insisted. Clara closed the ledger and stood, bracing herself. She found 4 women in the main room, all dressed like they were going somewhere important instead of showing up unannounced at a working ranch. Rebecca stood in the center, flanked by 3 others Clara didn't recognize. Miss Whitmore, Rebecca said with that same smile that didn't reach her eyes. We were concerned when you didn't attend my tea. I thought we should check on you. That's kind, but unnecessary. I'm fine. We can see that. One of the other women looked around the room with obvious curiosity. Quite comfortable here, aren't you? I work here, so yes, I'm comfortable. It must be nice, another woman said, having such generous employers. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt her jaw tighten. I work for my wages, same as anyone else. Of course you do, dear. Rebecca's tone was so sweet it made Clara's teeth hurt. It's just that people do talk. A young woman living in a widower's house with minimal supervision. Mrs. Chen lives here too, Clara interrupted, and I have my own room, with a lock. Still, appearances matter, especially for women in our position. Our position? Clara couldn't help it. She laughed. I don't think we're in the same position at all, Miss Thornton. You have a father who owns a bank. I have $7 in saved wages and clothes I've mended so many times they're more thread than fabric. So forgive me if I'm not overly concerned with appearances when I'm just trying to survive. The room went silent. Rebecca's smile finally faltered. There's no need to be hostile. We're just trying to help. Are you? Because it seems like you're trying to shame me for making the best of a bad situation. And honestly, I don't have the energy for it. Clara crossed her arms. I'm not going to your teas. I'm not going to apologize for working an honest job. And I'm not going to let you or anyone else make me feel bad about it. So if that's what you came here for, you can leave. One of the women gasped. Rebecca's face went red. Well, I can see we've wasted our time. She turned toward the door, the other women following like ducklings. I hope you know what you're doing, Miss Whitmore. This town has a long memory. Good. Maybe they'll remember to mind their own business. The door slammed. Clara stood there, shaking with anger and adrenaline. Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen, clapping slowly. That was beautiful. I'm almost sorry I missed the beginning. You heard? Every word. That girl needed someone to knock her down a peg or 10. Mrs. Chen's smile was sharp. You just made an enemy, though. I made an enemy the second I showed up without a husband or a trust fund. Might as well own it. That's the spirit? Clara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. They're going to make my life hell, aren't they? Probably. But you know what? You don't need them. You've got work, you've got a roof, and you've got people here who actually give a damn about you. The Rebecca Thorntons of the world can rot. It should have made Clara feel better. And it did, a little. But she also knew that small towns had ways of punishing women who didn't fall in line. Ways that were subtle and persistent and designed to grind you down until you either left or surrendered. She'd just declared war. Now she had to figure out how to survive it. The next few days were tense. Clara threw herself into work, updating records with a ferocity that bordered on obsessive. Mrs. Chen left her alone, understanding that sometimes people needed to burn off anxiety through productivity. On the third day after the confrontation, Clara was in the garden when a rock sailed over the fence and landed near her feet. She looked up to see 3 boys, maybe 12 or 13, standing at the edge of the property. "Whore!" one of them shouted. Clara's blood went cold, then hot. She stood, brushed the dirt off her hands, and walked toward the fence. The boy's bravado faltered when she didn't run or cry. "You kiss your mother with that mouth?" she asked conversationally. "My ma says you're a loose woman," the ringleader said, trying to sound tough. "Your ma needs a hobby." Clara leaned against the fence. "What's your name?" "Why?" "Because when I tell Mr. Boon that someone's been throwing rocks and calling names, he's going to want to know who. And then he's going to have a conversation with your parents. So you can tell me now, or you can wait for him to find out on his own. Your choice." The boys looked at each other, suddenly less certain. "We didn't mean nothing by it," one of the younger ones said. "Yeah, you did. You meant to hurt me, to scare me off." Clara kept her voice level. "But here's the thing. I've survived a lot worse than 3 kids with rocks and words they don't fully understand. So you're going to have to try harder than that." They ran. Clara watched them go, then went back to her weeding. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't let herself stop. Stopping meant thinking about how much this was going to escalate. How many more rocks, how many more names, how many more ways the town would try to drive her out. She was still in the garden when Caleb came back. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" "Nothing I couldn't handle." "Clara." She told him about the boys. His jaw went tight. "I'll talk to their parents." "Don't." Clara stood, brushing dirt off her skirt. "It'll just make it worse. They're kids doing what kids do when adults give them permission to be cruel. Punishing them won't fix the actual problem." The actual problem being? Rebecca Thornton and her friends have decided I'm a scandal. And in a town this small, what they think becomes what everyone thinks. Clara met his eyes. "I knew this would happen. I told you people would talk. And I told you I don't care what they say." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one they're calling names." Caleb stepped closer. "You want to leave?" Did she? Part of her did. Part of her wanted to pack up and disappear before this got any worse. But another part, the stubborn part that had kept her alive through cholera and bankruptcy and 3 months on the road, that part wanted to dig in and fight. "No," she said, "I don't want to leave." "Then don't." "It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple. You stay or you go. Everything else is just noise." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to believe it was that easy. But she'd learned the hard way that noise had a way of becoming signal, that whispers became shouts, that judgment became reality if enough people agreed on it. "I'll stay," she said, "but don't expect me to pretend this isn't hard. I wouldn't ask you to." That night at dinner, Mrs. Chen announced she was going to visit David for a few days. "He's got a problem with his forge he wants help figuring out. I'll leave Sunday, be back Thursday." Clara's stomach dropped. "You're leaving me here alone? With—" She stopped, aware of how that sounded. Mrs. Chen gave her a look. "With a man who's been nothing but respectful? Yes. Unless you've seen something I haven't." "No, but—" "Then there's no problem. You're both adults. You can manage 4 days without a chaperone." But it wasn't about managing. It was about how it would look. Mrs. Chen gone, Clara and Caleb alone in the house together. The gossips would have a field day. Caleb seemed to read her mind. "I can sleep in the bunkhouse with the hands." Don't be ridiculous, Mrs. Chen said. This is your house. Then I'll sleep in the barn, Clara offered. Neither of you is sleeping anywhere but your own rooms. Mrs. Chen's voice had that tone that meant the discussion was over. You're going to go about your business like normal, sensible people. And if anyone has a problem with it, they can come talk to me when I get back. Clara wanted to argue, but she could see it would be pointless. Mrs. Chen had made up her mind. Sunday came too fast. Clara helped Mrs. Chen pack, fighting the urge to beg her not to go. She felt ridiculous. She was a grown woman, not a child afraid of the dark. But the thought of being alone with Caleb, of the intimacy that came from sharing a house with no buffer, made her nerves sing. You'll be fine, Mrs. Chen said, reading her like a book. He's a good man. I know that. Then trust it. Trust yourself. She climbed into the wagon and picked up the reins. And for the love of everything, if something does happen between you two, don't make it complicated. Life's complicated enough. She was gone before Clara could ask what exactly she meant by that. The first evening alone was awkward. Clara made dinner, stew, because it was hard to screw up stew, and they ate mostly in silence. Every scrape of a fork on a plate sounded too loud. Every glance felt weighted with meaning that probably wasn't there. This is weird, Clara said finally. Caleb looked up. Yeah? Yeah. We've been eating dinner together for 3 weeks, but now that Mrs. Chen's gone, it feels weird. That's because we're thinking about it too much. So we should just not think about it? Worth a try. They finished eating. Clara washed dishes while Caleb dried, and gradually the awkwardness faded. They fell into an easy rhythm, passing plates and cups without needing to speak. It felt domestic, normal, dangerous. After the dishes were done, they ended up on the porch again. It had become a habit, these evening conversations under the stars. Clara had started to look forward to them, this quiet time when the work was done and the world felt smaller, more manageable. Can I ask you something? Caleb said. Depends on the question. What made you decide to stay? Really? Clara thought about it. I was tired of running, tired of waking up in a different place every few days, tired of not knowing where my next meal was coming from, tired of being afraid all the time, she paused. And I liked it here. Liked the work. Liked Mrs. Chen. She stopped. Liked what? Liked feeling like I mattered, like I was building something instead of just trying not to fall apart. Caleb was quiet for a moment. You do matter. Here, you matter. The words hit Clara harder than they should have. She'd spent 3 months feeling invisible, disposable, like she could disappear and the world wouldn't notice. Having someone tell her she mattered, having Caleb tell her she mattered, it cracked something open inside her. Thank you, she managed. They sat in silence after that, but it was comfortable now. The kind of silence that meant you didn't need words to fill space, that just being near someone was enough. Clara knew she was in trouble, knew that whatever she'd told herself about keeping things professional was already slipping away. You couldn't sit with someone under the stars night after night, couldn't share meals and conversation and quiet understanding without something shifting, without feelings getting involved. She should pull back, create distance, protect herself. But she was so tired of protecting herself, so tired of building walls just to keep from getting hurt. I should get to bed, she said, standing before she could change her mind. Early start tomorrow. Clara? She paused. I'm glad you stayed. Ask me again in 6 months, she said, echoing their earlier conversation. I will. The second day without Mrs. Chen, Clara woke to find Caleb already gone. He'd left a note on the kitchen table, had to check the north fence line, would be back by evening, help yourself to anything. She made herself breakfast and worked through the morning, updating records and reorganizing files. Around noon, she ventured into town to pick up supplies Mrs. Chen had mentioned they needed. It was a risk, going alone, but Clara refused to hide. The general store was quiet. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Porter, served her without comment, though his wife watched from the back with obvious disapproval. Clara ignored her, paid for her purchases, and left. She was loading the wagon when she heard footsteps behind her. Miss Whitmore? Clara turned. A man stood there, older, well-dressed. She recognized him from the bank, Rebecca's father. Mr. Thornton, I wanted to speak with you about your situation. My situation. Your employment at the Boon ranch. It's causing quite a stir in town, as I'm sure you're aware. Clara set down the bag she'd been holding. Is it? People are concerned. About propriety. About the example being set. What people? Decent people. People who care about the moral fabric of this community. Clara wanted to laugh. Moral fabric. As if this town had ever cared about morality when it came to anything that actually mattered. Mr. Thornton, with respect, I don't care what people think. I have a job. I'm doing that job. If people want to make it into something it's not, that's their problem, not mine. His expression hardened. It becomes your problem when it affects your ability to live here, to work here. Are you threatening me? I'm advising you, as someone who has the community's best interests at heart. And those interests include running off a woman who's just trying to earn a living? Those interests include maintaining standards. You're a young, unmarried woman living in a house with a widower. It's inappropriate. Mrs. Chen lives there too. Mrs. Chen is an employee, hardly a proper chaperone. Clara felt her temper rising. So what exactly are you suggesting? That I quit my job? Leave town? What? I'm suggesting you consider your position carefully and perhaps make choices that won't invite such scrutiny. Like marrying someone. Is that the magic solution? Find a husband and suddenly I'm respectable? It would certainly help. The audacity of it stunned her. Let me make something very clear, Mr. Thornton. I'm not going to marry someone just to make you and your friends comfortable. I'm not going to quit my job, and I'm not going to leave town. So you and everyone else who has opinions about my life can take those opinions and... She stopped herself, barely. Thornton's face went red. Young lady, I'm done with this conversation. Clara climbed into the wagon. Tell your daughter and her friends to find something better to do with their time than worry about mine. She drove away before he could respond, her heart pounding. That had been stupid. Thornton was powerful in this town. He could make her life very difficult if he wanted to. But Clara was tired of bowing to people who use their power to make others small. When she got back to the ranch, she unloaded the wagon with shaking hands. She was still putting things away when Caleb came in, dusty and tired. How was town? He asked. Clara debated lying, then decided against it. I had a run-in with Rebecca's father. He suggested I reconsider my employment here. Caleb went very still. He what? He was polite about it, mostly. But the message was clear, leave or face consequences. What did you say? I told him to mind his own business, less politely than that. Something fierce flashed across Caleb's face. Good. Good? Caleb, he could what? Run you out of town? He can try. Caleb stepped closer. Clara, I know this is hard. I know people are making it harder. But if you let them win, if you let them make you afraid to live your life, they'll do it to someone else next. Someone who might not be as strong as you are. I'm not strong. Yes, you are. You just don't see it yet. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she was strong enough to weather this. But doubt had a way of creeping in, especially when the world kept proving her worst fears right. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed and listened to the house settle, her mind racing through everything that had happened, everything that could still go wrong. Around midnight, she gave up and went to the kitchen for water. She was surprised to find Caleb there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. Can't sleep either? He asked. Apparently not. She poured herself water and sat across from him. They didn't speak for a while, just sat in the lamplight and the quiet. Sarah used to say that hard times showed you who people really were, Caleb said eventually. The ones who stood by you when it cost them something, those were the ones worth keeping. She sounds wise. She was, about most things. He turned his cup in his hands. She would have hated what they're doing to you, the gossip, the judgment. She had no patience for that kind of cruelty. I wish I'd known her. I wish you had too. The words hung between them, weighted with everything they weren't saying. Clara felt the pull again, that dangerous current drawing her towards something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Caleb, I know. He looked up, his eyes finding hers across the table. I know this is complicated. I know the timing's terrible. I know there's 100 reasons we should keep our distance. But I can't seem to make myself care about those reasons when you're sitting across from me at midnight looking like you're carrying the weight of the world. Clara's breath caught. We shouldn't... Probably not. It would make everything worse. Probably. The town would... To hell with the town. Caleb stood and came around the table. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that she could feel the heat of him. I'm tired of letting other people decide how I live my life. I did that after Sarah died, let grief and guilt make all my choices, and it nearly killed me. I'm not doing it again. What are you doing? I'm telling you that whatever this is between us, I want to see where it goes, and I think you want that too, even though it scares you. He was right. It scared her terribly. But underneath the fear was something else. Want, pure and simple. Want that she'd been trying to ignore for weeks now. Yes, she whispered. Yes, what? Yes, I want that too. And yes, it scares me. Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand curved around her jaw, thumb brushing her cheek. The touch was gentle, careful, like she was something precious that might break. We'll figure it out, he said. Together. Then he was kissing her, and Clara stopped thinking altogether. The kiss ended as gently as it started. Caleb pulled back just enough to search her face, his hand still cupped against her jaw. Clara's heart was doing something complicated in her chest, beating too hard and too fast while simultaneously feeling like it might stop altogether. That okay? He asked quietly. Clara let out a breath that was half laugh, half something else entirely. I think so. I don't know. Ask me when my brain starts working again. His mouth quirked into almost a smile. Take your time. They stood there in the lamplight, neither quite ready to step away or figure out what came next. Clara's thoughts were a mess of want and fear and the nagging certainty that she'd just made everything infinitely more complicated. But complicated didn't feel bad right now. It just felt real. We should probably talk about this, she said finally. Probably. Set some ground rules or something. If you want. Clara stepped back, needing distance to think. I do want. Because in about 3 days, Mrs. Chen is coming back. And I'd like to have some idea of what we're telling her, or not telling her, or, I don't know, I haven't thought this through. Caleb leaned against the table, watching her pace. What do you want to tell her? That's not helpful. I'm asking you. I'm asking you back. Clara stopped pacing and looked at him. He seemed calm, which was infuriating because she felt like she was vibrating out of her skin. Aren't you freaking out even a little bit? No? Why not? Because I've spent 3 years not feeling much of anything, and right now I feel something good. I'm not going to panic about that. It was such a simple statement, delivered so matter-of-fact, that it knocked something loose in Clara's chest. She sat down heavily in the chair she'd vacated earlier. I'm terrified, she admitted. I know. Not of you, just of this. Of letting myself care about something and then watching it fall apart. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair next to her and sat, close enough that their knees almost touched. I can't promise it won't fall apart. Life falls apart sometimes. But I can promise I'm not going to run the first time things get hard. I've already lived through the worst thing I can imagine. This doesn't scare me the same way it scares you. That's not fair. You've already had your great love story. And you think that means I used up my quota? He shook his head. It doesn't work like that, Clara. Loving Sarah didn't make me less capable of loving someone else. It just taught me what I was looking for. And what's that? Someone who doesn't give up. Someone who fights for what they want even when it's hard. Someone who shows up and does the work. He met her eyes. Sound like anyone you know? Clara's throat went tight. She wanted to deflect, to make a joke, to do anything but sit with the weight of what he was saying, but she'd spent 3 months running from hard things, and she was tired. Okay, she said. Okay, what? Okay, we try this. Whatever this is. We see where it goes. She held up a hand before he could respond. But slowly. I need slow and private, at least for now. I can't handle the whole town having opinions about my love life on top of everything else. Slow works for me, and private is fine. This is nobody's business but ours. And Mrs. Chen's, probably. She'll figure it out in about 5 seconds. Mrs. Chen's different. She's family. The word landed soft but deliberate. Family. Clara hadn't had family in months, and before that her family had been small, just her parents and her. The idea of being part of something bigger, even something as small as a household of 3, made her chest ache. When she gets back, Clara said, we tell her, but nobody else. Not until we know what we're doing. Agreed. They sat there a while longer, neither quite ready to go back to bed, neither willing to name what had just shifted between them. Eventually, Clara stood, suddenly exhausted. I should try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long either way. Caleb stood too. For a moment she thought he might kiss her again, but he just touched her shoulder briefly. Good night, Clara. Good night. She made it to her room before her knees went weak. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her face, trying to process what had just happened. She'd kissed Caleb Boon. More accurately, he'd kissed her and she'd kissed him back, and now everything was different. Clara lay back and stared at the ceiling, the same ceiling she'd been staring at for weeks now. But tonight it felt like she was seeing it from a different angle. Everything looked different when you stopped running long enough to actually see it. She must have slept eventually, because she woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of Caleb moving around in the kitchen. Clara dressed quickly, suddenly self-conscious in a way she hadn't been before. What was the etiquette after you kissed your employer at midnight? Was there etiquette for that? When she emerged, Caleb glanced up from the stove where he was burning eggs. Morning. Morning. Clara moved to take over before he could ruin breakfast entirely. I've got this. I can cook. You really can't. She nudged him aside and assessed the damage. Salvageable, barely. Go do ranch things. I'll handle food. He poured coffee instead, leaning against the counter and watching her work. It should have been uncomfortable, but it wasn't. It was just Caleb, same as every other morning, except now Clara was acutely aware of his hands and the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders, and the fact that she knew what his mouth felt like on hers. You're staring, she said without looking up. Am I? Yes. Huh. He didn't stop. Clara felt a smile tug at her mouth despite herself. This is going to be weird, isn't it? Probably, but we'll figure it out. They ate breakfast in companionable silence, or at least what passed for companionable, when both people were hyper-aware of every movement the other made. Afterward, Caleb headed out to work, and Clara tackled the mending that had piled up over the last few days. She was halfway through darning a sock when someone knocked on the door. Clara set aside her work and answered it to find Martha Graves standing on the porch with a covered basket. Morning, Martha said. Brought you some bread. Baked too much yesterday. It was obviously a lie. Nobody accidentally baked too much bread, but Clara appreciated the kindness of it. That's thoughtful. Thank you. Come in? Martha stepped inside, looking around with open curiosity. Nice place. Caleb keeps it better than most men would. Mrs. Chen's influence, mostly. Speaking of, heard she's out of town for a few days. Here it was. Clara braced herself. She's visiting her son. And you're here alone with Caleb Boon. Martha's eyes were sharp, but not unkind. That must be giving certain people fits. It is. Good. Those people need something to worry about besides their own dull lives. Martha set the basket on the table. I'm not here to lecture you, if that's what you're thinking. The thought crossed my mind. I'm here because I remember what it's like to be young and alone and trying to make your way in a place that doesn't want to make room for you. Martha pulled out a chair and sat without invitation. I came here 20 years ago from Ohio, widowed at 26, no children, no money. People had opinions then too. Clara sat across from her. What did you do? Ignored them, built my boarding house, made a life. Eventually they got bored and moved on to judging someone else. Martha leaned forward. The thing about small towns is they need someone to talk about. Right now that's you. But give them a few months and someone else will do something scandalous, and you'll be old news. Assuming I last a few months, you will. You've got spine, I can tell. Martha stood. Just remember, the people worth knowing don't care about the gossip. The rest aren't worth your time anyway. After she left, Clara felt fractionally better. It helped knowing at least one person in town didn't think she was a fallen woman corrupting the local widower. Small victories. The day passed in routine tasks. Cleaning, cooking, mending. Clara found herself listening for Caleb's return in a way she hadn't before, aware of his absence in the house. When he finally came in around dinner time, dusty and tired, something in her settled. How was your day? He asked, washing up at the basin. Quiet. Martha Graves came by. Yeah, she's good people. She brought bread and veiled encouragement to ignore the gossips. Smart woman. Caleb dried his hands and came to where Clara was stirring a pot of beans. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. This okay? What? This. Me being close. Clara considered. The smart answer was no. Keep distance. Maintain boundaries. But she was tired of smart answers. Yeah, it's okay. They ate dinner side by side, and afterward Clara washed while Caleb dried, and it all felt dangerously domestic. Like they were playing at being something they hadn't defined yet. But Clara didn't hate it. That was the surprising part. She'd expected to feel trapped or pressured or overwhelmed, but instead she just felt steady. That night on the porch, Caleb asked, "You want to know about Sarah?" Clara looked at him, surprised. "Only if you want to tell me." "I think I do. I think it's important you know." He was quiet for a moment, gathering thoughts. "We met when we were young, 17, 18, got married at 20. We had 8 years together before she died. That's not much time." "No, but it was good time. She was—" He stopped, started again. "She was steady. That's the word that comes to mind, smart and steady, and she didn't take any of my nonsense." Claire smiled despite herself. "Sounds like she had her hands full." "She did. I was more reckless back then. She mellowed me out, made me think before I acted." He looked out at the dark prairie. "When she got pregnant, we were happy. Scared, but happy. And then everything went wrong so fast there wasn't time to be anything but terrified. I'm sorry. The worst part was that I couldn't do anything. Couldn't fix it, couldn't stop it, couldn't even hold her hand without feeling useless. She was in pain, and I just had to watch." Clara reached over and took his hand. He gripped it hard. "I don't tell you this to make you feel bad for me," he said. "I tell you because I want you to understand. I know what it's like to lose someone. And I'm still here, still willing to take that risk again. That should tell you something." "It tells me you're either brave or stupid." "Maybe both." They sat in silence, hands clasped. Clara thought about loss and risk, and the peculiar courage it took to open yourself up to hurt again. She wasn't sure she had that courage, but maybe being around someone who did would help her find it. The next day brought unexpected visitors. Clara was in the garden when she heard horses. 3 riders came up the road, ranch hands from neighboring properties she guessed from their clothes and bearing. They stopped in the yard and one of them called out, "Boon around?" Clara stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "He's checking the south fence. Should be back in an hour or so." The man who'd spoken, older, with a weathered face and suspicious eyes, looked her over. "You're the girl living here?" It wasn't a question, and Clara didn't like his tone. "I work here." "That what we're calling it now?" The other 2 men snickered. Clara felt her jaw tighten. "Is there something I can help you with, or are you just here to be rude?" "Just here to give Boon a message. Tell him Jim Fletcher wants to talk to him about running a joint drive next month. He knows where to find me." "I'll tell him." The man started to turn his horse, then paused. "You know, Boon's a good man. Shame to see him mixed up in something that'll damage his reputation." "His reputation is fine. For now, but people talk. They're saying he's gone soft, letting some pretty thing take advantage of him." Clara crossed her arms. "And what do you say?" "I say it's none of my business what a man does in his own house. But it becomes my business when the whole town's talking about it and reflecting poorly on all of us." "All of you?" "Ranchers, landowners, men trying to make an honest living without scandal attached." "Well," Clara said, voice ice cold, "you can tell those men that I'm making an honest living too. And if they've got a problem with how I do that, they can come say it to my face instead of sending messengers." The man's eyes narrowed. "You got a mouth on you." "I've got a spine too, and a brain, shocking as that might be to you." He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Your funeral, girl." They rode off, leaving Clara shaking with anger and adrenaline. She wanted to throw something, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything but stand there feeling helpless against the tide of judgment rolling toward her. When Caleb came back, she told him about the visitors. "Jim Fletcher," he said, jaw tight. "Figures. He's always been a self-righteous son of a bitch. He said people are talking about you, saying you've gone soft. Let them say it. Caleb, this affects your business. You're standing in the community. Maybe we should..." "Should what? Pretend this isn't happening? Ask you to leave to make them comfortable?" He shook his head. "No, I'm not doing that." "But..." "No." He stepped closer. I don't care what Jim Fletcher thinks. I don't care what any of them think. They want to judge me for giving someone a job, for treating someone with basic decency? Then they're not people I want to do business with anyway. That's easy to say now, but when it starts costing you money, then it costs me money. I'll survive. He cupped her face in both hands. Clara, listen to me. You are not a problem to be solved. You're not a scandal I need to manage. You're someone I care about, and I'm not going to throw you aside because some men with too much time and not enough sense have opinions. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I don't want to cost you everything. You won't. And even if you did, it would be my choice, not theirs. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, trying to pour everything she couldn't say into the contact. When they broke apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. We're going to be okay, he said. Clara wanted to believe him. That night, she couldn't sleep again. She lay in bed and listened to the wind and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. The ways it was already going wrong. The weight of other people's judgment pressing down like a physical thing. Around 2 a.m, she heard footsteps in the hall, a soft knock on her door. Clara, you awake? She got up and opened the door. Caleb stood there in his nightshirt, hair disheveled, looking as tired as she felt. Can't sleep either? She asked. Keeps happening. He hesitated. Can I come in? Clara knew she should say no, knew that him in her room at 2 a.m. was exactly the kind of thing people were already assuming, but she was tired of making decisions based on what other people thought. Yeah, come in. He stepped inside and she closed the door. They stood there awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure what to do now. Then Caleb said, I'm not here for anything improper. I sleep better knowing you're close, knowing you're safe. Safe from what? Everything, everyone. I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair. This probably sounds insane. No, I get it. Clara moved to the bed and sat, patting the space beside her. You can stay if you want, just to sleep. He sat, carefully keeping space between them. They lay back side by side on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling. It should have been strange, but it wasn't. It was just comfortable. Tell me something true, Clara said into the darkness. Like what? Anything. Something nobody else knows. Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then he said, Sometimes I'm angry at Sarah for dying. I know it wasn't her fault. I know she didn't choose it, but sometimes I'm just furious that she left me to figure everything out alone. Clara reached over and found his hand. That makes sense. Does it? Yeah, grief isn't logical. You can miss someone and be angry at them at the same time. Your turn. Tell me something true. Clara thought about it. I'm terrified that if I let myself be happy here, something will happen to take it away. Like happiness is a limited resource and I already used mine up. That's not how happiness works. How does it work then? I don't know, but I know you can't live your whole life braced for disaster. That's not living. That's just surviving. Surviving's what I'm good at. I know, but maybe it's time to get good at something else. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, close but not quite touching. When Clara woke in the pre-dawn light, Caleb was gone. But there was a note on the pillow. Morning. You drool when you sleep. It's kind of endearing. Clara smiled despite herself and crumpled the note, tucking it into her pocket. Mrs. Chen came back that afternoon, her wagon loaded with supplies and gifts from David. She took one look at Clara and Caleb and raised an eyebrow. So, she said, something happened while I was gone. What makes you say that? Clara asked, too quickly. You're both terrible liars. You, she pointed at Caleb, look less miserable than usual. And you, she turned to Clara, look terrified but in a different way than before. Caleb glanced at Clara, who shrugged. Told you she'd figure it out. Figure what out? Mrs. Chen set down her bags. One of you better start talking. Clara started, then stopped. What were they exactly? We're seeing where things go, trying something. I don't know what to call it. You're courting, Mrs. Chen said bluntly. That's the word you're looking for. That sounds so formal. It is formal, that's the point. She looked between them. I assume you're being smart about this, keeping it quiet until you know what you're doing? That was the plan, Caleb said. Good, because the town's already in an uproar about Clara being here. You two announce you're together, and they'll lose their minds. We know, Clara said. Trust me, we know. Mrs. Chen nodded, apparently satisfied. All right then, just don't do anything stupid while you're figuring it out. Define stupid, Caleb said. You know what I mean. No giving people ammunition. We'll try. Over dinner, Mrs. Chen filled them in on her visit with David. He was doing well, had taken on an apprentice, was thinking about expanding his business. Normal, everyday things that reminded Clara there was a world beyond the drama of this ranch and this town. He asked about you, Mrs. Chen said to Clara. Wanted to know if you were still here. What did you tell him? That you were stubborn and still figuring things out. He said that sounded about right. Clara smiled. She'd liked David, his easy humor and obvious affection for his mother. It was nice to know someone out there thought well of her. That night, after Mrs. Chen had gone to bed, Clara and Caleb sat on the porch as usual. She took it well, Clara said. Did you expect her not to? I don't know what I expected. I'm kind of making this up as I go. That makes two of us. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Clara thought about how much had changed in just a few days. How things that seemed impossible could become real if you stopped fighting them. Caleb? Yeah? I think I want to open a shop. He looked at her surprised. What kind of shop? Sewing, mending, alterations, maybe eventually making clothes from scratch. I'm good at it, and there's not really anyone in town doing it well. She'd been thinking about this for days, the idea slowly taking shape. I could work here in the mornings, run the shop in the afternoons, save up money, build something that's mine. That's a good idea. You think so? I know so. You're wasted just mending my socks. He turned to face her. You'd need a space in town, though, rent somewhere. I know, and I don't have enough saved yet, but maybe in a few months? What if you didn't have to rent? Clara looked at him. What do you mean? I own a building in town. Used to be a general store before Porter built the bigger one. It's been sitting empty for 2 years. You could use it. Caleb, I can't just... Why not? It's empty. You need space. Makes sense. People will talk. They're already talking. Might as well give them something real to talk about. Clara wanted to argue, but the truth was the idea excited her. Her own shop, her own business. A way to prove she was more than just a woman who needed saving. I'd pay rent, she said. We can work that out. And I'd do it right. Get proper signage, keep good books, build a real customer base. I know you would. They started planning right there on the porch. What the space would need, how to get word out, what kind of work she'd take on. Clara felt something unfurl in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The next morning, they rode into town together to look at the building. It was on a side street, small but well built, with good windows and enough space for a work table and storage. It needed cleaning and some minor repairs, but nothing Clara couldn't handle. What do you think? Caleb asked. Clara walked through the space, imagining where everything would go. A table here, shelves there, a mirror for fittings. She could see it so clearly, it hurt. I think it's perfect. They spent the rest of the day cleaning. Clara scrubbed floors while Caleb fixed a broken window and a door that stuck. Mrs. Chen showed up around noon with lunch and cleaning supplies, taking in the space with an approving eye. This could work, she said. You'll need fabric, though, and thread, needles, all the basics. I know, I'm making a list. David could help with that. He knows a supplier in the city who deals in sewing goods. They worked until dark, and by the time they finished, the space looked almost respectable. Clara stood in the doorway and looked at what they'd accomplished, feeling something fierce and bright building in her chest. This was hers, not handed to her, not given out of pity, something she was building with her own hands and her own skills. You look happy, Caleb said, coming to stand beside her. I am. I'm terrified and excited and probably insane for thinking I can do this, but yeah, I'm happy. He put his arm around her shoulders, and Clara leaned into him, letting herself have this moment of pure possibility. Of course, that's when Rebecca Thornton walked by. She stopped, staring at them with undisguised shock and something else, something that looked like vindication, like she'd finally gotten proof of what she'd suspected all along. Miss Whitmore, she said icily. Mr. Boon, how cozy? Clara straightened but didn't step away from Caleb. Rebecca, I see you're setting up shop. How enterprising. Her eyes flicked between them. And how convenient having such generous landlords. The building was empty, Caleb said flatly. Now it's not. That's all there is to it. Of course, I'm sure that's exactly how the town will see it too. Rebecca's smile was sharp. A young woman with no resources suddenly getting a free building from the man she's living with. Very innocent. I'm paying rent, Clara said, even though it wasn't Rebecca's business. I'm sure you are, in one way or another. The implication hung in the air like poison. Clara felt Caleb tense beside her. You need to leave, he said, voice hard. I'm on a public street. Then we'll leave. He took Clara's hand. Come on. They walked away, leaving Rebecca standing there looking pleased with herself. Clara was shaking with anger. She's going to tell everyone, she said. She's going to make it sound like, I know. This is going to make everything worse. Probably. Aren't you upset? Caleb stopped walking and turned to face her. Yeah, I'm upset. But not because of what she thinks or what she'll say. I'm upset because she's trying to ruin something good out of spite and boredom. He cupped her face. But she can't actually ruin it unless we let her. You know that, right? Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd seen what gossip could do in small towns, how it could poison everything it touched. I don't want to lose this, she whispered. Any of this. Then don't. Fight for it. We both fight for it. Clara looked up at him, at the determination in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her. She'd been running for so long, always ready to flee at the first sign of trouble, but maybe it was time to stand and fight instead. Okay, she said. Okay. We fight. Caleb kissed her right there on the street, in full view of anyone who cared to look. It was a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. When they broke apart, Clara saw curtains twitching in windows, saw people staring. Let them stare. She was done hiding. The fallout from that kiss came faster than Clara expected. By the next morning, 3 women had canceled orders they'd placed with her before she'd even officially opened the shop. Martha Graves stopped by with the news, her face grim. They're saying you're a corrupting influence, Martha reported, settling into a chair in the half-finished shop. That decent women shouldn't associate with you. Clara kept her hands busy organizing spools of thread David had sent. If she stopped moving, she might start screaming. And what are you saying? That they're idiots with too much time and not enough problems. Martha leaned back. But I'm not going to lie to you, girl. This is going to get worse before it gets better. I know. Do you? Because right now you've got the backing of Caleb Boon and his reputation. But if this keeps up, if people start choosing sides, you could drag him down with you. Clara's hand stilled. I know that too. And you're staying anyway? I'm staying anyway. Martha studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Someone needs to teach this town that women can make their own choices. Might as well be you. After Martha left, Clara sat alone in the shop and let herself feel the weight of it. She was betting everything on this. Her future, her reputation, Caleb's standing in the community. If it failed, she'd have nothing. Again. But if she ran now, she'd always wonder what might have been. And she was so damn tired of wondering. The door opened. Caleb came in, bringing the smell of sun and dust with him. Heard you lost some customers, he said. News travels fast. Always does. He sat on the edge of her work table. You okay? Clara thought about lying, then decided against it. No, I'm angry and scared and wondering if I'm being selfish by staying. You're not selfish, aren't I? This affects you too, Caleb. Your business relationships, your standing in town. Jim Fletcher already thinks you've gone soft. How long before others start thinking the same thing? Let them think it. I don't need their approval to run my ranch. But you need their business. You need buyers for your cattle. I need you more. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything. Clara looked at him, at the steadiness in his eyes, and felt something crack open in her chest. You can't mean that. I do mean it. Clara, I spent 3 years barely living, going through the motions, and then you showed up and reminded me what it felt like to actually care about something. About someone. He reached for her hand. I'm not giving that up because some people are narrow-minded and cruel. What if they make it impossible for you to do business here? Then I'll do business somewhere else. There's more than one town in Kansas. You'd leave? This ranch, this place you built with Sarah? Caleb was quiet for a moment. I loved Sarah. I'll always love her. But she's gone, and I'm still here. And I get to decide what my life looks like now. And I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. I don't know if I'm worth that. Well, I do, so maybe trust my judgment. She laughed, watery and rough. Your judgment got you into this mess. Best decision I've made in years. He pulled her close, and Clara let herself lean into him, let herself take comfort in his solidity. They stood like that for a while, neither speaking, just breathing together in the dusty afternoon light of her almost shop. When Clara finally pulled back, she said, I'm opening next week, with or without customers, even if it's just me sitting here mending my own clothes out of spite. That's the spirit. And I'm going to be the best damn seamstress this town has ever seen, so good they can't ignore me even if they want to. I believe you. You have to say that. You're courting me. Caleb grinned, and it transformed his whole face. Clara realized she didn't see him smile nearly enough. Yeah, I guess I am. The next week was a blur of preparation. Clara worked dawn to dusk getting the shop ready. She painted the walls, built shelves from scrap wood, created a small fitting area with a curtain for privacy. Mrs. Chen donated an old mirror. David sent fabric samples and a catalog for ordering supplies. Martha spread the word among the few people in town who didn't care about scandal. Caleb helped whenever he could, but the ranch kept him busy. They stole moments together, breakfast before dawn, late-night conversations on the porch, the occasional kiss when Mrs. Chen wasn't looking. It wasn't enough, and it was everything. On the morning Clara was supposed to open, she stood outside the shop and stared at the sign Caleb had helped her hang. Simple black letters on white wood, Whitmore Tailoring and Alterations. Her name, her business, her risk. She unlocked the door and went inside. No customers came that first day. Clara had expected that, but it still stung. She sat at her work table and hemmed a skirt for herself, trying not to watch the door, trying not to count the hours of silence. Around 3 o'clock, the door opened. Clara looked up, hope flaring. An older woman stepped in. Someone Clara had seen around town but never spoken to. She was dressed plainly, worn around the edges in the way that spoke of hard years and harder choices. You the seamstress? The woman asked. I am, Clara Whitmore. Helen Morrison, Tom and Jake's mother. She pulled a dress from her bag. Needs the hem taken up and a tear in the sleeve fixed. How much? Clara quoted a fair price. Helen nodded and counted out coins. I'll have it ready by Friday, Clara said. Good. Helen started to leave, then paused. My boys told me about you, said you had backbone. We need more women with backbone around here. She left before Clara could respond, but the words stayed with her. Backbone. Maybe that's all she'd ever had. The stubborn refusal to give up even when giving up made sense. More customers trickled in over the next few days. Not many, but enough. Women who didn't care about gossip or who had their own reasons for not bowing to Rebecca Thornton's opinions. Clara took every job seriously, poured her skill into every stitch, made sure every customer left satisfied. Word started to spread. Not about scandal, but about quality. About a young woman who could make worn clothes look almost new, who could alter a dress to fit perfectly, who charged fair prices and did beautiful work. It was slow, painfully slow. But it was progress. 2 weeks after opening, Rebecca Thornton walked into the shop. Clara looked up from the shirt she was mending, surprised into silence. Miss Whitmore, Rebecca said coolly, I need a dress altered. She pulled out a beautiful green silk gown, the kind that cost more than Clara made in a month. There was a challenge in her eyes. A test. Clara could refuse, should refuse, probably. But she thought about what Martha had said, that the work spoke louder than the gossip, and she needed the work. When do you need it? Clara asked. Next Saturday. There's a social at my father's bank. That gave Clara a week. She examined the dress, noting the places where it pulled wrong, where the fit wasn't quite right. She could fix it, could make it perfect. I can do it. $30. Rebecca's eyes widened. That's highway robbery. That's the cost of working with silk this fine on a tight timeline. If you want it perfect, that's my price. If you want it cheap, take it somewhere else. They stared at each other. Clara refused to blink first. Fine, Rebecca said finally. $30. But it better be flawless. It will be. After Rebecca left, Clara sat down hard in her chair. Her hands were shaking. She'd just taken on the most important job of her life. Not because of the money, but because Rebecca would tell everyone what kind of work she did. Good or bad, it would define her. She couldn't afford to mess this up. Clara worked on that dress like her life depended on it. Because in a way it did. She took it apart and reconstructed it, adjusting the fit to Rebecca's measurements, making it hang the way expensive dresses were supposed to hang. She stayed up late, worked by lamplight, redid seams that were good enough because they needed to be better than good enough. Mrs. Chen brought her food and coffee and didn't comment on the obsessive focus. Caleb stopped by the shop each evening and sat with her while she worked, reading his paper or doing ranch accounts, just being there. "You're going to make yourself sick," he said one night, watching her squint at tiny stitches. "I'm fine." "You've been at this for 12 hours. It has to be perfect." "Clara, I know what you're going to say. That it doesn't matter what Rebecca thinks, that one customer doesn't define me, that I should take care of myself." She set down her needle. "But you're wrong. This matters. This one job could change everything. Or it could just be a dress. It's never just a dress." Caleb came around the table and tilted her face up to look at him. "You're already good enough. You know that, right? You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I have to prove it to myself." He kissed her forehead. "Then prove it. But don't kill yourself doing it." By Friday afternoon, the dress was done. Clara held it up in the light, examining every seam, every stitch. It was beautiful, probably the best work she'd ever done. Rebecca came to pick it up Saturday morning. She took the dress into the fitting area without a word, and Clara waited, stomach churning. When Rebecca emerged, she was wearing the dress. It fit perfectly, hugged her curves without being improper, flowed without dragging, made her look like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine from back east. Rebecca turned this way and that, examining herself in the mirror. Her face gave nothing away. Finally, she said, "It's acceptable." Acceptable. Clara wanted to laugh. The dress was perfect, and they both knew it. "Good, that'll be $30. Rebecca paid without argument and left, still wearing the dress. Clara sank into her chair and let out a long breath. That night at the bank social, which Clara heard about secondhand from Martha, Rebecca apparently received compliments all evening. People asked who had done the alterations. Rebecca, to her credit, or maybe just because she couldn't lie about something so visible, told them. By Monday, Clara had 6 new customers. By the end of the month, she had more work than she could handle alone. "You need help," Mrs. Chen said, watching Clara try to manage 3 fittings in one afternoon. "I can't afford to hire anyone." "So train someone. There's got to be a girl in town who could use the work and the skill." Clara thought about it. Mrs. Chen was right. She couldn't do this alone. Not if she wanted to grow. But who could she trust? The answer came unexpectedly. Helen Morrison showed up with her niece, a quiet girl of about 16 named Anne. "She's good with a needle," Helen said. "And she needs work. Her father died last year, left her mother with 4 kids and no income." Clara looked at Anne, thin, nervous, with hands that wouldn't stop fidgeting. "You know how to sew?" Clara asked. "Yes, ma'am. My mother taught me." "Show me." Anne sat at the work table and hemmed a scrap of fabric. Her stitches were small and even, her tension good. Not perfect, but good enough to train. "All right," Clara said. "I can pay you $3 a week to start. You'll work 5 days learning the business. If you're good and we get busy enough, I'll raise it to 5. Anne's face lit up. "Really?" "Really. Can you start tomorrow?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down." After they left, Clara felt something shift. She was employing someone, giving another woman a chance the way Caleb had given her one. It felt right. Training Anne gave Clara's days new structure. The girl was eager to learn, quick with her hands, and grateful for the opportunity. Clara taught her the way her mother had taught her, with patience and high standards and the understanding that quality mattered more than speed. "Why do we redo this seam when it looks fine?" Anne asked one day, examining her work. "Because fine isn't good enough. Fine is what keeps us at the bottom. Excellent is what builds reputation." Clara showed her the tiny pucker in the fabric. "See this? Most people won't notice it, but we'll know it's there. And knowing we did less than our best, that eats at you." Anne nodded seriously. My mother used to say something like that. She said how you did one thing was how you did everything. Clara smiled, recognizing her own mother's words. Your mother was smart. As fall deepened into winter, Clara's life found a rhythm. Work at the shop 5 days a week, with Anne handling the simpler jobs and Clara taking the complex alterations. Sunday dinners at the ranch, now attended by David and sometimes Martha. Evenings with Caleb, talking about everything and nothing. They didn't hide their relationship anymore, but they didn't flaunt it either. They just lived their lives, and slowly the town accepted it. Not everyone, Rebecca and her circle still sneered, and the Thorntons made their disapproval known in small ways. But enough people stopped caring that it stopped mattering. The shop thrived. Clara had to order more supplies, expand her hours, raise her prices because demand outstripped supply. She hired a second girl, then a third. Women who needed work and were willing to learn. One evening, almost a year after she'd first arrived at the ranch with 7 quilts and no future, Clara sat on the porch with Caleb and looked out at the prairie. I've been thinking, Caleb said. About? About making this permanent. Us, I mean. Clara's heart kicked. Permanent how? He turned to face her. Marry me. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a demand either. Just Caleb being Caleb. Direct, honest, a little blunt. That's not much of a proposal, Clara said. You want me to get down on one knee, make a speech? No, but maybe you could tell me why. Because I love you. Because you make me want to wake up in the morning. Because this ranch feels like a home again instead of just a place I work. He took her hand. Because when I think about the future, you're in it, always. Clara felt tears burning. I'm scared. I know. What if I'm not good enough at this? At being a wife, at building a life with someone? Then we'll figure it out together. Same way we figured everything else out. He squeezed her hand. Clara, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to stay. She thought about that word, stay. How it had terrified her a year ago. How it still scared her if she was honest. But fear wasn't a good enough reason to run anymore. Yes, she said. Yeah? Yeah. I'll marry you. Caleb pulled her close and kissed her, and Clara let herself fall into it, into him, into the terrifying, beautiful possibility of a future she hadn't planned but somehow wanted more than anything. They married quietly 3 months later. Just Mrs. Chen, David, Martha, and a handful of others who'd supported them through the hard times. No big ceremony, no fancy dress. Just vows spoken in the ranch house parlor, simple and true. Clara wore a dress she'd made herself. Cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar. Practical but beautiful. Caleb wore his good suit, the one he saved for cattle sales and important occasions. When the preacher asked if she took this man, Clara thought about the girl she'd been a year and a half ago. Desperate, alone, terrified. She thought about all the ways she'd changed, all the ways she'd stayed the same, the fear that still lived in her chest, the hope that had grown alongside it. I do, she said. They honeymooned for 3 days, Clara's limit for leaving the shop in Anne's capable hands. They rode out to the far edge of Caleb's property and camped under the stars, just the two of them, and the prairie and the sky. On the second night, lying in Caleb's arms under a blanket of stars, Clara said, Do you think she would have approved, Sarah? Caleb was quiet for a moment. I think she would have liked you. You're both stubborn as hell and terrible at asking for help. Clara laughed. That's not an answer. Yeah, it is. She would have wanted me to be happy, and you make me happy. He kissed the top of her head. I think she'd be glad I found you. I'm glad I found you too, even though you were terrible at mending your own socks. Still am. Good thing I married a seamstress. They fell asleep like that, tangled together under the endless Kansas sky, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their old lives and built something new. The years that followed weren't easy. The shop continued to grow, but growth brought its own challenges. Clara had to learn to manage employees, handle difficult customers, make business decisions that affected other people's livelihoods. She made mistakes, hired the wrong person once, priced a job too low and lost money, argued with Caleb about expanding when he thought she was taking on too much. But she learned, adapted, kept pushing forward. The ranch had hard years too, drought that killed off cattle, market crashes that destroyed prices, injuries and setbacks that tested Caleb's resilience, But they weathered it together, pooling resources and determination. 5 years after their wedding, Clara stood in a shop twice the size of the original, employing 8 women, teaching them the craft her mother had taught her. She looked around at the organized chaos, fabric everywhere, women bent over sewing machines and hand-stitching, the hum of productive work, and felt something close to pride. Anne had become her assistant manager, handling the day-to-day while Clara focused on the complex work and business strategy. 3 of her other employees had families they supported with their wages. Real sustainable income that gave them independence. That's what mattered most to Clara. Not just that she'd built a successful business, but that she'd created opportunities for other women. Women who might otherwise have no options, no way forward. One afternoon, a young woman came into the shop. She was thin, worn-looking, with desperation in her eyes. She had a bag of embroidered handkerchiefs she was trying to sell. Clara bought all of them, paying more than they were worth. As the woman counted the money with shaking hands, Clara said, "You have a good hand, clean stitches. You ever think about doing alterations?" The woman looked up, startled. "I don't have experience. Neither did I when I started. But if you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach." She watched understanding dawn on the woman's face, watched hope kindle where there'd been only fear. It was like looking in a mirror at her younger self. "Really?" the woman asked. "Really, come back tomorrow. We'll start you on simple mending, see how you do." After the woman left, Anne came over. "We're already fully staffed," she said, though her tone was gentle. "I know, but I remember what it's like to be that desperate, to need someone to take a chance on you." Clara looked at her assistant manager. "If we can give someone that chance, we should." Anne smiled. "You sound like your mother, based on the stories you've told, anyway." "I'll take that as a compliment." That evening, Clara rode out to meet Caleb at the north fence line. He was fixing a section that had come down, and she sat on her horse watching him work, marveling at the life they'd built. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "Am I?" "You know you are." Clara dismounted and came to stand beside him. "I hired someone new today." "Yeah? Business must be good." "It is, but that's not why I hired her. She reminded me of me, scared and desperate and trying to sell things that were worth more than she was asking." Caleb straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "So you helped her?" "So I helped her." Clara leaned against the fence post. "Is that stupid? Taking on someone we don't really need?" "No. It's who you are." He pulled her close. "It's one of the things I love about you. You remember where you came from, and you don't want anyone else to suffer through it alone." "Sometimes I worry I'm not doing enough. There are so many women out there struggling, and I can only help a handful." "A handful's more than nothing. And those women you help, they'll help others. That's how change happens. One person at a time, one choice at a time." Clara thought about that. About the ripple effects of kindness and opportunity. About how Caleb's decision to pay fair value for her mother's quilts had changed everything. About how sometimes all it took was one person believing in you. 7 years after arriving at the ranch with nothing, Clara stood at the window of the shop she'd built and watched the town move around her. Women she employed walked past on their way home. Customers called out greetings. Even Rebecca Thornton, now Rebecca Fletcher, married to Jim's son, nodded coldly when their paths crossed. It wasn't friendship, but it was acknowledgement. Clara had become part of the fabric of this town, woven in through her work and her determination and her refusal to disappear when things got hard. That night at dinner, the ranch now employed 2 hands full-time, and Mrs. Chen had her own cottage on the property. Clara looked around the table at the family she'd built. Caleb across from her, Mrs. Chen to her left, David visiting with his new wife. Not the family she'd been born into, but the family she'd chosen. The family that had chosen her back. "I have news," Clara said, and the table went quiet. Caleb looked at her, curious. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news, I think." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The table erupted. Mrs. Chen clapped her hands, David cheered, his wife squealed. Caleb just stared at Clara, his expression cycling through shock, joy, fear, hope. "You're sure?" he asked. "As sure as I can be, about 2 months along, I think." He came around the table and pulled her up into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. After Sarah, I thought maybe, I know, but this is different. I'm different. We're different. Clara cupped his face. I'm scared too. But we'll figure it out. Together, he said. Together. The pregnancy was hard. Clara had to scale back her hours at the shop, let Anne take over more of the management. She hated feeling useless, hated watching other people do work she should be doing. But Caleb and Mrs. Chen and Anne all told her the same thing. Rest, let your body do what it needs to do. The shop will be there when you're ready. So Clara rested and worried and tried to prepare for a future that still felt fragile and uncertain. When labor came, it was long and brutal. 16 hours of pain that felt like it would never end. Mrs. Chen stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, talking her through it. Caleb paced outside until Mrs. Chen finally let him in, and he sat beside Clara and let her squeeze his hand until she thought she might break his fingers. And then, a cry. Thin and indignant and absolutely perfect. A girl, Mrs. Chen said, placing the baby in Clara's arms. A healthy baby girl. Clara looked down at her daughter, red-faced and squalling, tiny fists waving, and felt something break open inside her. All the fear, all the protection she'd wrapped around her heart. It cracked wide and let in a love so fierce it was almost painful. Sarah, she said, looking at Caleb, if that's okay, I'd like to name her Sarah. Caleb's face did something complicated. You don't have to. I want to. She's part of this story too, part of what brought us here. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Sarah it is. Raising a child changed everything and nothing. The shop continued under Anne's management. The ranch kept running. Life kept moving forward, but now there was this small person at the center of it all, demanding attention and care and love. Clara was terrible at it at first. She didn't know how to soothe the baby's cries, couldn't figure out feeding, panicked at every small thing. Mrs. Chen talked her down from the ledge more times than Clara could count. You're doing fine, Mrs. Chen would say, taking the screaming baby and somehow getting her to calm. Every mother feels like this. Did you? Every single day for the first year, and then you figure it out, and it gets easier. It did get easier. Clara learned her daughter's rhythms, her needs, her personality. Sarah was stubborn and loud and determined, and Clara loved her with an intensity that still surprised her. 2 years after Sarah was born, Clara was back at the shop 3 days a week, bringing Sarah with her. The little girl played in the corner while her mother worked, surrounded by fabric and thread and the constant hum of women's voices. She grew up learning that women could build businesses, could support themselves, could choose their own paths. 5 more years passed. The shop expanded again. Clara wrote a small book about sewing techniques that sold well enough to justify a second printing. She taught classes on weekends, passing on the skills her mother had taught her to women who wanted to learn. The ranch prospered too. Caleb had bought adjacent land, expanded his herd, built a reputation for quality cattle. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable, secure in a way that had seemed impossible a decade ago. On Clara's 35th birthday, she stood on the porch of the ranch house, expanded now to include more bedrooms and a proper office, and watched Sarah chase chickens in the yard. Mrs. Chen sat beside her, older now but still sharp as a knife. You did good, Mrs. Chen said. We did good. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Probably not, but you would have found a way. You're stubborn like that. Clara smiled. Is that a compliment? Take it however you want. Caleb came out and handed Clara a small package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? She asked. Open it. Inside was a quilt. One of her mother's quilts, the flower garden pattern with the tiny hexagons. Clara ran her hands over it, eyes stinging with tears. Where did you find this? I never sold it. Kept it back that first day. Thought maybe you'd want it someday. Caleb sat beside her. Figured now was a good time. Clara pulled the quilt close, breathing in the smell of it. It didn't smell like her mother anymore. That scent had faded years ago. But it still felt like home, like memory made tangible. Thank you, she whispered. That night, Clara spread the quilt on their bed. She traced the hexagons with her finger, remembering her mother's patient hand stitching each piece. All those hours of work, all that care, creating something beautiful that would outlast her. You thinking about her? Caleb asked, coming to bed. Always. Wondering what she'd think of all this, of me. She'd be proud. You think so? I know so. You took what she taught you and built an empire. A small empire, maybe, but still. Clara laughed. I wouldn't call it an empire. 8 employees, 2 shops. You opened that second location last year, remember? Regular customers throughout the county, and a reputation that brings people from 3 towns over. That's an empire. I guess when you put it that way. She curled into him, pulling the quilt over them both. I was thinking about that day I showed up here. How desperate I was. How sure I was that everything was over. And instead it was just beginning. Yeah. Clara closed her eyes. I almost left, you know. That first week. I almost ran. What stopped you? You, Mrs. Chen. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, I deserved something good. She paused. And I was so tired of running. I'm glad you stayed. Me too. They fell silent, comfortable in the darkness. Outside, the prairie wind moved through grass. Inside, their daughter slept in the next room, safe and loved. The shop waited for Clara tomorrow, full of work and women who depended on her. The ranch spread out around them, land they'd built a life on. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still hard days and money troubles and people who judged them. Sarah was entering the age where she asked difficult questions. The shop needed repairs Clara wasn't sure they could afford. A drought was threatening the cattle. But Clara had learned something in the years since arriving with 7 quilts in a wagon. Perfect wasn't the goal. Survival wasn't even the goal anymore. The goal was building something that mattered, creating opportunities, showing other women that you could fall apart and put yourself back together differently, that you could lose everything and still find a way forward, that you could be terrified and do it anyway. 10 years after Clara Whitmore arrived at the Boon Ranch with nothing but desperation and her mother's quilts, she stood in her shop and watched Anne train a new employee. The girl was young, maybe 19, with that same haunted look Clara recognized from her own reflection a decade ago. You're doing fine, Anne said, patient and kind. See? That stitch is perfect. The girl looked up, surprised. Really? Really. Clara smiled and turned back to her own work. The cycle continued, women helping women, lifting each other up, creating pathways forward where none had existed before. That's what her mother's quilts had done, in the end. Not just provided money for survival, but opened a door to a different life. And Clara had walked through that door and found more than she'd ever imagined possible. She found work that mattered. She found family, chosen and built, not just given. She found love that was complicated and real and worth fighting for. She found herself, or maybe she created herself, piece by piece, stitch by stitch, day by difficult day. And in doing so, she'd built something that would outlast her. Not just the shop or the business, but the idea that women deserve chances, that fairness mattered, that one person treating another person with basic human decency could change everything. That evening, riding home beside Caleb with Sarah chattering in the wagon bed behind them, Clara looked out at the prairie she'd once found so intimidating and felt something settle in her chest. This was home. Not because it was easy or perfect or uncomplicated, but because she'd chosen it. She'd fought for it. She'd built it with her own hands and her own stubborn determination to survive. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked. Clara smiled. Everything. Nothing. How far we've come. Any regrets? She thought about it honestly. About the hard times and the fear and the moments when she'd wanted to give up. About the gossip and the judgment and the years it took to build something solid. No, she said finally. No regrets. And she meant it. Every choice, every risk, every terrifying leap into the unknown, it had all led here. To this wagon, this man, this child, this life. To the knowledge that she was capable of more than just survival, that she could build and create and thrive. The sun was setting over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Clara watched it and thought about her mother's quilts, about patterns pieced together from scraps, about how something beautiful could come from fragments if you had the patience to stitch them together right. That's what life was, she realized. Taking whatever pieces you had, broken or whole, beautiful or damaged, and making something from them. Not perfect, just yours. The wagon rolled on toward home, toward the ranch house with lights beginning to glow in the windows. Toward dinner and laughter and the ordinary magic of another day, survived and lived. Clara Whitmore had arrived with 7 quilts and nothing else. She left with something worth far more: a life she'd chosen, a family she'd built, and the unshakable knowledge that she was strong enough to weather whatever came next. The frontier had tried to break her. Instead, she'd broken it open and carved out a space for herself and every woman who came after her. That was worth more than all the quilts in the world.